She fought with her brother for the throne since childhood, earning the reputation of a terrifying villainess. But her brother was the real monster. He had cruelly disposed of her sacred beast, who was like a child to her. When he became emperor, he stripped Martina of her noble title and exiled her. Desperate to bring her child back, she found a prophet who offered to turn back time at the cost of her voice. Martina succeeded and returned determined to protect her girl, Lily. She soon learned that for her sacred beast to fully grow, she needed a kiss from the pillar of the nation. Knowing the identities of the future's strongest heroes, she began her search for a potential baby's daddy. First, she earned the trust of Ryan, the future god of war, who became so devoted he asked her to engrave her name on his body. Next, she partnered with the future's legendary mage, and the two began a partnership of mutual aid. This, however, ignited a fierce jealousy in Lion, and the two heroes soon became rivals. But there's still one more person in this fight for her heart. Miele, the protagonist's loyal servant who stayed by her side even in her past life. How's this story gonna unfold? And who are you rooting for to win her over? Let's find out together. The story begins by explaining that the secret of the Morand Empire to dominate the continent for centuries depended directly on protection of the sacred beast that was the guardian of that people. This beast was to be raised by the heir of the empire, seeing it as if it were its caretaker and almost like a father figure. And when this beast transformed into a human being, it also ended up becoming very attached to the heir, as if it were its biological father. One of these little creatures wakes up in its human form, stretching while commenting that it could smell its mother. It walks through the corridors complaining that even though its caretaker was a princess, she was always busy for some reason, and the little girl wished they could play all day long. She didn't understand why many said her mother was an evil woman, as if she were a terrible monster. But staring at the image of the woman in a huge painting in the hallway, she could only think that this kind of title was pretty cool. After walking for a long time, she finally finds her mother, named Martina, in a meeting with other nobles. For the little girl who spent a good part of her time as a very cute beast, that was the most incredible woman in the whole world. The two exchange glances quickly, and the pink-haired girl cannot help but notice the beauty of the woman. She throws herself into her lap for a warm hug. She asks them to do the thing they always did, and Martina agrees without a second thought. Then, they greet each other in a kind of secret touch, sticking their tongues out while staring at each other. And the nobles around the princess just watch the scene, not knowing how to react. Already in her mother's lap, the little girl whispers to ask if she had decided who would become her father. This makes Martina question if she was referring to the men who were having tea with her, and then explains that those were very dangerous monsters, despite being very handsome. Therefore, they were definitely not good candidates to be fathers. But that didn't seem to matter to Martina, who reassures the little girl that she only needed a mother while hugging the girl even tighter. And now the princess's main focus was to protect the little one, because in her past life, Martina lost that child. Although she did not tell her daughter this, she remembered as if it were yesterday when she was holding the little monster in her arms on a dark night. She was completely injured, but while trying to focus only on the little creature, someone calls the princess. It was Mayfield, the first prince of the empire, and also the girl's older brother, accusing her of having killed the sacred beast, which was the guardian of that kingdom during the incubation process. And for that, her crime would be seen as blasphemy. Extremely irritated, the woman shouts that the child wasn't even dead yet, and she assured that she would take care of her and heal her. The little creature in her arms stretches, trying to touch the princess's hair, who stares at her motionless, filling with hope. Even with difficulty, the sacred beast calls for her mother, saying that she was feeling a lot of pain. Those words tightened the princess's heart even more, making her cry as she thought about what to do in such a desperate situation. Meanwhile, Mayfield continues with his attacks, saying that the court magician had already diagnosed the creature, warning that she wouldn't survive even for one more day. And then, approaching the woman, he orders her to confess her guilt, which makes Martina even more irritated. Shouting to the nobles present, the young man states that by an imperial decree, Princess Martina was stripped of her noble status, being sentenced to 100 lashes. He hadn't even finished delivering the sentence when his men began to arrive to arrest the princess. Furthermore, Mayfield, with his sadistic face, adds that Martina would also be exiled to the border of the empire. In her past life, she had become a complete failure, being painted as the woman who brought ruin to the empire and as a murderer of gods. After being humiliated by her brother among those nobles, she was exiled to a desolate border. Meanwhile, Mayfield inherited the throne. Before all these events, in the imperial battle for the succession of the throne, they both were tasked with taking care of a sacred beast that was still in the incubator. And the boy's beast was born without any problems and helped him reach the peak of success. That was the first victory the young man had over his sister in his entire life. But even so, the girl would never admit that she had been defeated. Alone at the border, the girl wandered dressed in rags that did not protect her from the cold in the midst of the snow. But she only thought that she had to find a way to bring her child back to life and try to secure the inheritance of the throne, which was hers by right. Thus, she used a stone she found along the way to break the chains that bound her feet. She had finally managed to escape from the exile convoy. Of course, it wasn't easy. After all, Martina was pursued and nearly killed by the men sent by Mayfield. And so she fled without stopping and searched without ceasing until finally she found the legendary prophet who could help her. Something that surprised her, as Martina was the first to find her whereabouts in 1,000 years. With great humility, the girl pleads for the prophet to bring her daughter back to life, whom she carried in a small box. And because of her courage and determination to find her, the prophet offers help. However, she questions whether the woman was ready to pay the price for it, for she would have to give her life in that world in return and start all over again. And the prophet asks her if she was willing to end herself for the sake of a better future. That left Martina frightened and made her ask for proof that she could trust the sorceress, who replied that she was a very clever girl for that. And wrapping the beast with her enormous stem, she explains that in this life she could not do much for Martina and her daughter. So she needed to know if she was truly willing to move on to a next life. Very different from this one. Pulling out a blade she carried with her, the protagonist thanks, ready to make her greatest sacrifice thus far, asking that the sorceress take her to a glorious future. Far from the forest, in the midst of the royal palace, the girl suddenly awakens as if waking from a dream. And the first thing she noticed was that she didn't have a single wound. She also hadn't lost any weight, and her hair hadn't been cut. Apparently, everything was normal. The girl stared at her own body in surprise, not believing that this was really happening. Just as promised, she had been completely reborn. The girl celebrates, already thinking about the enemies she had left in her last life. However, she noticed something very important. Martina had already received the necklace that represented her contract with the sacred beast, which meant that in this new life she had already received the creature. And there it was, still inside the egg, in her precious bed. The protagonist runs to hug her, assuring that as long as that creature was alive and well, it was all that mattered to her. The girl was so emotional about the whole situation that she became afraid of dropping the egg on the floor, placing it back in its place to feel more at ease. However, there was still a big question. She wanted to know about the method that the prophet said she would use to protect that child who had not yet been born. It was then that a small window appeared, announcing the arrival of the customized guide for raising the beast. And this left Martina shocked, wondering what that was. Something that the window answered as if it were an entity, stating that it represented the desires of the prophet and was there to help her raise the sacred beast. When she began to explain that the beast and its guardian were united by their hearts and connected to the prosperity of that nation, the princess asked to cut the conversation short because she already knew all of this. Then, the small window informed that to help the beast grow, its guardian needed to receive a kiss of loyalty from one of the pillars of the nation. This was because the beast in question received its energy through its guardian, and when that energy was full, the creature would be able to resist any type of poison. The system further explains that the pillar of the nation was an individual who was essential for the prosperity of that empire. Meanwhile, the kiss of loyalty was a kiss on any part of the guardian's body given with the feeling of loyalty. This made the girl remember that in her past life she had read some ancient texts about sacred beasts, and they mentioned a secret method for the accelerated growth of sacred beasts that had been lost years ago. So perhaps it was talking about that. However, the real problem for Martina would be obtaining that kiss of loyalty from the pillar of the nation because her reputation was terrible. This was because since she was young, she fought with her brother for the right to inherit that throne. And as the two were always in conflict with each other, her reputation among noble women deteriorated. It didn't take long for her arrogant personality to be constantly criticized by other nobles who questioned what kind of princess she was, calling her a monster, a disgrace to the royal family, a witch, and other worse names possible. So it didn't matter who it was, she would never be able to make a man swear loyalty to a princess like her. However, the girl also knew that for the sake of her child, she could change her difficult ways a little. This was because her greatest desire was for her daughter to grow up strong and healthy, in addition to wanting to become a mother who would bring pride to the little creature. At that moment, all the girl wished for was that when the beast was born, it would smile at Martina and call her name. She could already imagine holding that little creature with all the love and affection in the world, as she was hopelessly in love with her daughter. But the girl was pulled from her peace when her bedroom door opened, and Louise, who was her personal maid, entered, wishing her good morning and explaining that she was there to help her get ready, accompanied by Lilin, the palace guard. She asks Martina to confirm what her schedule for the day would be, but before responding, the girl tells the two to come closer, making them nervous, as the princess was not a very easy person. And that reminds the protagonist that she usually had to deal with the fear of her servants, but she needed to receive a kiss from both of them. It was only for that reason that she didn't lose her composure, standing with her arms open for them to approach. Thus, somewhat reluctantly, the subordinates give her a kiss on the cheek, and the window explains that Lilin could indeed be one of the pillars of the nation, but she was definitely not loyal to the girl. As for the maid, she met neither of the two requirements. And this confirms the suspicions that the princess already had about how among the people who served her, there was a spy sent by her brother. The girl remembers that in her past life, after being sentenced to exile, Lilin defended her, losing her title and becoming an ordinary commoner. But Louise stopped being a maid to marry a nobleman and lived the rest of her life surrounded by luxuries. Moreover, in that life, the people who were close to her were also somewhat cold and distant because Martina had no idea who the spy was. But this time she could do things differently, as she could see everything much more clearly. Friendly, the woman thanks the two maids for always taking care of her. This makes both of them very nervous, as it was not normal for the princess to behave that way. Even so, Martina continues with her great act, telling the two to take a day off because she would handle things on her own. This leaves the maids emotional, as it had been a long time since they had been able to take a break. In fact, Louise's wish from last birthday was to have a day off. Smiling, Martina bids farewell to the two, telling them to enjoy their break. She knew that this was just the beginning of her process to improve her reputation a bit, because this would be good to soften the spy a little and make him a possible ally of the princess. There was no need to expose this person yet, as he was still very useful. Meanwhile, the two girls walked down the hallway, commenting in surprise about Her Majesty giving them a day off. Louise even pinched herself when she heard the words coming out of Martina's mouth to make sure of what she had heard. A young man overhears part of the conversation and asks what was happening with the princess. And excited, Louise explains that Martina had let the two of them kiss her and even took a pause. Moreover, Martina smiled several times during the conversation, and the girl couldn't help but notice how beautiful the princess's smile was. But Miel found everything very strange. Meanwhile, in her room, the girl thought that her exile in the past life had revealed many things about those around her. Some people really betrayed her, while others made a point of protecting her as best they could. Miel, the man who was in the hallway, was the court secretary and grew up alongside her, always teasing her with a smile. However, in the past, things were not so good. Once again, she is interrupted from her thoughts by some knocks on the door, and the secretary enters, commenting that he had heard rumors about the girl putting some rather strange ideas into practice. Martina considered him a childhood friend, as he was kind, punctual, and never did anything wrong. This also qualified him as a great secretary. The girl freezes upon seeing the daughter and the young man in front of her, as if she were seeing a ghost, running to him and celebrating the fact that he was alive. To which Miel responds as if it were obvious, being ironic by apologizing for disappointing her. And the girl becomes angry, questioning why he was acting that way so early. Then the young man explains that he was just a bit worried about the princess. Meanwhile, the girl continued to be emotional. She couldn't help but comment on her happiness at seeing that the young man was indeed alive. This was because there was a moment from her past life that Martina would never forget, on her way to exile, to protect her. The secretary positioned himself in front of her, taking a blow that was meant to be inflicted only on Martina. Bleeding but still smiling, the young man asked her to run away and escape once and for all. Referring to the protagonist as his princess, he certainly had a crush on her. Now, in front of him, the girl was in tears. This worried the secretary, who said that in all the years he had visited her, he had never seen Martina cry. So he wanted to know what was really happening. The girl sighed, thinking about what to say. Then she made up an excuse that last night she dreamed something bad was happening to her great friend. But now that he was in front of her, she was sure he would continue working for her until he turned 100 years old. This comment made the young man burst into laughter, ironically saying that if she really intended to keep him working for so long, she was indeed a very wicked princess. And the girl joined in the joke, confirming that if he tried to leave early, she would find a way to drag him back again. It was then that she realized it was a good time to test Miel. He was a great secretary, managing to organize the princess's entire routine and even making 12 types of black tea. But she wasn't sure if that qualified him as a pillar of the nation. So she asked the boy to give him a kiss on the cheek. But the young man complained that the girl was teasing him again, not very successfully, since she threatened to cut his salary in half that month if he refused to do what she was asking. The young man was clearly irritated by all of this and questioned whether the girl had always been so full of demands. Then he obeyed the princess's request, making it clear that he had no chance of resisting her demands. However, as the girl already suspected, the window stated that despite his extreme loyalty to her, he was not a pillar of the nation. Even so, Martina couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, for it seemed that the pillars of the nation were the people who had some influence over her, which reminded her that during her exile, several very talented individuals had emerged, and using her memories from the past, she could use this to her advantage and recruit those people. Changing the subject, the girl asked what the day's schedule would be, something that Miel found quite strange, as it was not the kind of thing Martina usually worried about. But he decided to get straight to the point and just answer her question. In the morning, she would try on the dress for the upcoming season's balls, and the princess immediately began canceling that commitment, which was very boring. In the afternoon, she would have a tea party with the countess who had invited her as the guest of honor, which was even worse for Martina, who ordered that commitment to be canceled as well. This was because she had attended that party in her past life and remembered very well that the women spent the entire afternoon talking about arranged marriages for their dogs. Poor Miel continued with the schedule for the afternoon ball that his brother was going to host, but he made it clear that the girl didn't need to go. After all, she already had a terrible reputation regarding her family. But Martina interrupted him, saying that she would indeed like to be at that ball. This was because the future god of war would be there, and he definitely qualified as a pillar of the nation. His name was Ryan Heathning, the youngest prince of the Heathning Empire, a future general and the undefeated god of dark war. Although he had never paid much attention to his homeland and had left the palace to live as a teenage wanderer, after growing up, Ryan joined a group of mercenaries that further tarnished his image, painting him as a disgrace to the nobility. But that was before the Heathning Empire declared war on Martina's kingdom. For at that moment, the boy returned home and won all the battles, earning the title of God of Dark War. And in her past life, his grudge against the protagonist's kingdom began at that very ball. He had been hired by some noble to provide more security for her at the event, but accidentally ended up tripping over another woman. She remembered how he apologized for the unforeseen event, asking if he could help with anything, but the woman began to scream hysterically, calling him a filthy mercenary and telling him to stay away. After that situation, her brother, with the help of other nobles, removed Ryan from the party. But now, if Martina helped him survive this crisis, perhaps he could earn a kiss of loyalty. And who knows, she might help reconcile their nations in the future. And with that excitement, she ordered her subordinate to prepare her best dress, as she would definitely be attending that ball, something Miel obeyed without a second thought. Later, in the ballroom, all the nobles were gathered in their elegant attire. And in her past life, the relationship Martina had with those people was terrible, for she herself rarely attended those events. So now she wondered if perhaps it wouldn't be good to change that in this life, while she spent her time. Thus, she approached one of the nobles, Lady Sophia, commenting that it had been a long time since they last met, and the woman was clearly nervous when she complimented the girl on her appearance. Then she spoke to a guy, reprimanding him for the way he greeted her, and he quickly corrected himself while his colleague, Edgar, asked why the girl was gracing them with her presence that day. And Martina ended up letting slip that even she enjoyed seeing idiots go to this type of event, quickly reprimanding herself in her head for having said what she really thought. But the guy didn't back down, ready to insult her. However, he was interrupted by someone who said that every time the girl was present, danger followed her. It was Mayfield, being sarcastic and trying to put his sister down, despite calling her dear little sister. He approached Martina without a second thought. Trying to lighten the mood a bit, the Prince of the Empire warned that since the music had started, one of his guests should take the opportunity to dance. And the young man bid farewell, thanking for the invitation to the venue. The two siblings there, in a terrible atmosphere of tension. Martina stared at Mayfield as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, disappointed in her own brother. He asked if she didn't hate being in places where he was the most esteemed, questioning why she decided to come to his ball. And the girl replied that she simply wanted to dance. But that answer was not at all satisfactory for the young man, who didn't believe a word of what Martina said. He whispered in her ear that all those people present there despised her or feared her, and therefore no one would want to dance with the princess. The girl's eyes went blank, as she was already used to Mayfield's provocations, while the young man continued telling her to stop embarrassing herself in front of the royal society, for a princess without a partner at her own ball would cause a great scandal. And then he suggested that if the girl put herself in his place and begged for a dance with her own brother, he would do her that charity. And then he suggested that if the girl put herself in his place and begged for a dance with her own brother, he would do her that charity. When she finally spoke, Martina said that wouldn't be necessary. And at that moment, what she had predicted happened. The scream of the other princess towards Ryan echoed through the hall. It was at that moment that, smiling, the protagonist declared that she had already found her perfect dance partner. In the eyes of the nobles, mercenaries were like dogs. They were people without loyalty, without pieces of land, without servants. And as long as you could give them some money, they could help you using their fighting skills, which meant they could work for one side today and for another tomorrow, like a dog that would go anywhere as long as you paid well. So why did people have to be nice to this kind of people? And there she was, complaining about the fact that they had brought a man as dirty as Ryan to that noble event. In fact, it was only because of this status that they decided to place the responsibility for what happened on Ryan. His employer complained, but the mercenary said he was just doing his job, protecting him at that ball. Even so, the guy continued to be hysterical, asking how he dared to speak like that. Several guards approached, telling the young man to kneel and take the blame quickly, or to leave the ball at once. When Ryan replied that he had already apologized, the others mocked, saying that his apology was insignificant, as he was just some commoner. They were only speaking to him that way because they didn't know Ryan's true identity. But if he acted in a hot-headed manner, without thinking, he could end up causing a dispute between the nations, which was better avoided. So he chose to remain silent in the face of that injustice. And only when the two nations went to war long after did the situations of the past come to light. Even with him almost out of the palace, the woman couldn't help but comment that he was very frightening, and one of the nobles approached her, saying that her courage to report what had happened would surely go down in history. But the woman only says that they shouldn't let that useless man ruin the event. Meanwhile, before the young man leaves the hall, someone shouts saying it was good to leave him alone, as he was her dance partner. This surprises even Ryan himself, who turns to look for who had said something like that. To his surprise, it was Martina, pointing at him, saying she had chosen him, asking who had dared to expel the princess's partner from the ball. The noblewoman approaches, trying to justify that the young man had assaulted, but the girl is unmoved, saying she would compensate the other with 2 new dresses if that was the case, questioning if she was actually hurt because she managed to hear the screams from far away. However, she didn't seem to have even a scratch. This is enough to leave the woman indignant, saying that she couldn't really want to dance with a lonely mercenary, because she was a princess and shouldn't do anything to tarnish the royal family's reputation. But this doesn't shake Martina, who only asks if the mercenary had heard all of that, self-proclaiming a crazy princess and asking if he had the courage to take her to dance. Ryan was still surprised by the whole situation, somewhat lost, but he decided to take a risk, freeing himself from the guard's hands. And he explains that where he came from, strong women were like the fiercest war horses, and only the bravest warrior was worthy of taming them. And for that, he thanked Martina for finding him worthy to take him to dance, kissing her hand right in the middle of the hall. Thus, the ball continues normally, when one of the guards decides to report what happened to the prince. Mayfield only says that his sister was a very unpredictable woman, and she loved to do this kind of out-of-the-box thing. But to him, that didn't matter, because later he was sure she would come back crying to his lap. After all, he was her only older brother. Meanwhile, in the middle of the hall, the princess danced with her new partner, and Ryan thanks her for the extreme help, to which the girl responds by explaining that she couldn't stand those snooty nobles, who kept talking about character, but in reality only liked to provoke the weaker ones. To try to return the kindness, the young man explains that she could ask for whatever she wanted. That was a great opportunity for Martina, but if she asked the young man to kiss her hand so directly, it probably wouldn't work. So she asked what she could ask of him. And while they continued that warm dance, the young man explains that one of the things she could ask for example, was his protection for a month. Or maybe she could ask him to fight for her. And she could even order a murder. He made sure to say this last part very quietly in the girl's ear, so as not to draw too much attention. Excited by his proposal, Martina asks what he would do if she asked him to kill a prince for her sake, something Ryan could do without much trouble. However, to do that, she would have to tell her whole life story. She had almost forgotten that she was dancing with a mercenary, which meant she was dealing with a complete desperate man. She knew that the young man's only psychic support was his own nation and his mother. She reveres him at the end of the dance, saying that she had no interest in such a barbaric murder, but she had a great idea, and she asked the young man to meet her alone the next day, an offer that left the boy a little curious. But he apologized, explaining that he couldn't accompany her, unfortunately, and that indeed took the girl by surprise. Later at the palace, the girl complained to Miel, questioning why the young man had refused her invitation, to which the secretary responds that perhaps he already knew something about the princess's character, and she stands up, stressed, questioning what was wrong with her character. And the young man explains that she was aggressive, sometimes crossed the line, and almost always disturbed him when they were children, but trying to contest him. The woman claims that the last part was just his personal hatred speaking. However, the young man had left a note with his address, so the girl just needed to figure out how to get the loyalty kiss. She was stressed because she knew that if she didn't manage to do that, her child would die again. She stares at that egg, noticing its movement, and in desperation, she comments to Miel that it was moving, asking if that was a sign that the creature was about to be born. Then the little window appears, informing the girl that the divine beast had sensed the aura of the nation's pillar in her mother. That was a great sign, and the girl approached the egg, embracing it. She knew that everything she had gone through, escaping exile and being reborn, was to reach that exact moment. Finally, the hope of seeing her child again reignited in Martina's heart. She could feel that the creature was hungry, which was a good sign in her view. But Miel spoiled her celebration by asking how an egg could be hungry, to which the princess replied that he need not worry about that, for if her child were hungry, she would know. A bit apprehensive, he warned that it was dangerous to hold the egg that way, suggesting that the girl place it down. And when he tried to do that, the egg moved, causing the two to exchange tense glances. She argued with Miel, saying that the creature was moving because it was hungry, but the boy didn't want to hear it. He just said that the egg was about to crack, so they had to be even more careful. He ordered the maids to help regulate the temperature to make it more suitable for incubation. Additionally, the egg would receive aromatherapy using the perfumes that Your Highness use most frequently. And finally, he found a way to arrange instruments to play calming music. All this care made the princess laugh and comment that he was like a true mother at that moment. And the secretary said that as everyone in the kingdom commented, he was a person without the slightest sense of villainy. And his main role in the castle was to protect the things that his mistress cared about. Her words left the girl quite satisfied. Despite this, there was still caution in that place. This was because in the girl's past life, when the egg cracked, the creature already showed signs of illness. She couldn't live even a single day, and even the strongest wizard in the kingdom couldn't save her, dying in her arms. But the girl was determined to do everything to ensure that this did not happen again in this life. In fact, now that it had been confirmed that the mercenary Ryan was one of the pillars of the nation, the woman's main goal was to earn his kiss of loyalty. The princess stood up, saying she would go after some information, and Miel asked her not to take too long, because for the egg to finally crack and the beast to be born, Martina needed to be present. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl's words about how he was acting like a mother. However, he believed he should at least be a father, but he would never say that to Martina. Just that idea made him completely blush. The next day, at the hotel in Sepoya, someone informed that the blue-eyed mercenary was not present because he had gone to Perot Park, known as the Cemetery of the Nobles, something that the hotel worker thought was insane, as it was a day of heavy snow. But its location made it clear to Martina why the boy had declined her invitation the day before. That was the anniversary of his mother's death, something the boy would never miss. Indeed, there he was, holding a bouquet of lilies. Ryan was the son of the Emperor of Sinan, while his mother was a noble lady from the Moran Empire. These two nations had always been at war. However, his mother fell hopelessly in love with the rival emperor, whom she met by chance on one of her travels. Despite her family's objections, the woman pursued a relationship with Ryan's father and ended up getting pregnant. She was ridiculed by the social circles of the Sim Empire, which was frustrating. After all, she had left her hometown, and now the nation of her own husband and son did not accept her. Eventually, the woman died of depression and was buried in the cemetery of her hometown, as she requested. When Ryan was still a committed mercenary, he made a point of visiting his mother in her hometown. His idea had always been to retrieve the belongings that his mother had kept when she was young, but unfortunately, the woman's family did not want to see him. Standing in front of the tomb, the boy was deep in thought until he was surprised by someone calling him. It was Martina and Lilin, celebrating the fact that the fighter had not left yet. And smiling, Martina showed a box she was carrying, claiming it was a gift for him. The boy was quite disoriented and questioned what she was doing there, to which the princess replied that he would know as soon as he opened the box. The boy was very confused by the whole situation. After all, a cemetery is not exactly a suitable place for visits. To his surprise, inside the box were things that belonged to his mother, the things he had longed for. He was astonished by the contents, not knowing how the girl managed to get them. But all Martina said was that he need not worry, as she hadn't mentioned anything about her identity yet. He had only just learned that the boy was in the noble cemetery, and considering those intense blue eyes that were characteristic of Vitas's family, he discovered his identity by doing a brief search. But what the young man was really interested in was knowing how Martina had obtained those items, for the deceased's family had hidden anything related to her since the woman had fled. Thus, the protagonist reveals that she used her privileges as a villain to get what she wanted. Just as the young man at the hotel said, it was a day of very intense snowfall, which contributed to the tense atmosphere between the two. Closing the box, Ryan states that regardless of what the woman's goal was with all of this, he thanked her. After all, she had delivered to him what he wanted most, his mother's belongings, something that was priceless to Ryan. But to be honest, he didn't know how he could repay that favor, because within the Sinan Empire, he was the least favored prince. His father's children with the new imperial concubine were of pure blood and would likely inherit the throne in his place. Moreover, his maternal family had never even acknowledged his existence, and it had been over 20 years since they had seen each other. So all he had was the sword he was carrying in his hand at that moment and the horse behind him. something he doubted the princess would want. The young man still confidently asserts that the mercenaries were just beasts without a cause. And revering the girl, he says that her gift was enough to buy his life. That's why he wanted to know who he should kill. And with a satisfied smile on her face, Martina explains that she didn't want to do anything of that sort. Extending her hand, the girl asks if he wouldn't like her to become his home. For what others could not deliver to him, she would give without thinking twice. And she would stand by his side against anyone who tried to hurt the young man. As long as he accepted, she would never let him be a lonely beast again. That moment brings to mind the memory of when the boy was still a child, alone, holding a wooden sword. It was as if he saw a door opening before himself, and the little girl so small showed a solution to all his problems. Still, Ryan confirms if she really wanted to tame a wild beast and make it live around her. And the woman retorts, saying that a villain and a beast would be something quite fun to see, questioning if the young man didn't agree. He can't help but laugh, commenting on how incredible the woman in front of him was, and he calls her a crazy princess, before carefully taking her hand and swearing his devotion to the girl, sealing their agreement with a kiss on her hand, and reaffirming that from then on she would be his home. A small window immediately appears, stating that the young man met both prerequisites, to be a pillar of the nation and truly loyal to the girl, and it informs him that Martina had obtained the energy of the sacred beast at its peak. It also triggers an emergency alert, as having reached the size of the energy, the beast was ready to be born and its egg was about to crack. This makes the protagonist scream in disbelief. She didn't know how everything had happened so quickly, and her hysterical pose slightly startled Ryan, who had no idea what she was talking about. Therefore, he questions if she had already regretted their deal, asking why she seemed terrified, suggesting that she didn't want to accept his oath just like that. It was as if he would die if the girl changed her mind. So Martina needed to find a quick excuse. She makes it clear that she wasn't the type of person who simply changed her mind at the last minute. It's just that she had remembered something important she needed to do back at the palace. So she shouts for Lilin, asking how quickly they could get there. But the woman soon makes it clear that their carriage would only arrive by early afternoon at the latest, which was already too late for the girl. Behind Martina, Ryan places one of his coats over her to protect her from the cold, and the woman quickly protests, saying that there was no need to do that since she wasn't that cold, and she didn't care if she was. It was then that she was lifted by the young man, by surprise, causing our girl to scream. And while she was in Ryan's arms, he explains that it could get very cold when riding amidst intense winds. He places the princess on his faithful horse, explaining that since it was a very fast creature, he could get the woman to the palace before noon. However, he makes it clear that it would be an irregular path and the journey would be cold. Asking if that was a concern for the protagonist, she responds extremely seriously, not even caring if her hands and feet fell off from the cold, telling Ryan to take her immediately. Thus, the horse trots away, taking the two allies quickly, and the boy can't help but comment on how that crazy attitude was very characteristic of Martina. They finally arrive at the Imperial Palace of Mirand, thanking Ryan for his help. Our girl states that she would contact him as soon as she took care of her daughter, and this last part leaves the boy astonished, confirming that he had indeed heard that, something that the woman responds to with a proud smile on her face, confirming that she indeed had a daughter. But she doesn't give many explanations, entering the royal palace. Knowing that that crazy princess had a child with someone he didn't even know left Ryan unsettled. He didn't know who he was, but he was sure that as soon as he learned about his identity, he would kill him. But he quickly suppressed that thought because it would probably provoke anger in the woman, and he didn't want that, because Martina would hate him if he did anything to the father of her daughter. So he just needed to be patient. In the princess's block, the atmosphere was very tense, because the egg containing her child was already starting to crack. Miel was pacing around that creature, complaining worriedly because the first person the beast should see should be the princess. And even though he had already sent someone to look for her, he was starting to worry that perhaps Martina wouldn't arrive in time at the palace. Thus, in an act of desperation, he and the other maids fervently asked the sacred beast to wait a little longer. A request that didn't seem like it would be granted. After all, the crack was only getting bigger, causing everyone present to scream in astonishment. That's when suddenly our girl bursts into the room, shouting that it was too noisy in there. Finally, things calmed down a bit. She felt like she was on a real roller coaster of emotions. After all, the last time she was in that position, that child was already dying when the egg broke, and that was a scene that would forever be the princess's worst nightmare. She approaches the egg nervously and with great fear for her future. She couldn't help but wonder if that little creature would be born healthy, or better yet, if she would even survive this time. She gets closer, about to touch the shell of her daughter. However, before she could do that, the egg broke open, revealing a healthy little creature without a scratch. And this scene was enough to make Martina's eyes fill with tears and her heart swell with emotion. She grabs her new daughter, very grateful, thanking her for being born healthy this time, like a true mother. Meanwhile, on the prince's side of the palace, the atmosphere was very different. Gloomy. His egg was also cracking, but it didn't have the same commotion as his sister's baby. In the room, Mayfield observed that distant scene, when the cub finally was born without a scratch as well. One of his servants congratulates him on the birth of his sacred beast, commenting that he had heard that his sister had also been blessed on that same day. However, the look with which Mayfield stares at him leaves him dazed as if he had seen a ghost. This is because the prince says he had ordered him to poison that egg himself, indignant at his servant's incompetence. Meanwhile, in the girl's room, things couldn't be better. Her cute little creature was drinking milk from a bottle like a real human baby. The woman watched her closely, thinking about how lovely it was to see that little thing drinking milk. It was fascinating to think that sacred beasts had the same consciousness as a 2 to 3-year-old child. However, if she kept drinking so much milk, she might soon be able to absorb magical powers. But that thought was quickly dismissed by the window that stated that sacred beasts gained almost no power through feeding, and the only effective source of magic for them was the loyalty kiss from one of the pillars of the nation, something that the girl was already tired of hearing and asks if she had to gain long-term loyalty from as many people as possible, something that the system confirms. At least now she had found Ryan. The problem was that since he continued to be a mercenary, his next mission could be in a distant place like another nation. So she decided it would be better to hire him as her personal guard for a while. However, the window warns her of one thing, giving a hint that if the pillar of the nation didn't have enough experience, he could lose that status, leaving the princess confused. So that means if Ryan didn't go out traveling the world, he might not be able to become the god of Dark War, which meant that his decisions would directly impact his future. That was a lot of stress for the woman who just wanted to live in peace with her daughter. Suddenly, the little creature jumped out of the crib asking for a kiss and calling her mommy. This small gesture made Martina's heart race. She was so cute. And then she hugged her, giving her several kisses. She knew that no matter how difficult things were, she would do anything for her daughter. Alone with the creature, she told the story of a flower called Lily that existed in that kingdom. It was a flower that could grow for 300 years and even come back to life after being burned. And thinking about all this, she decided to name the little creature Lily, like the name of the flower lily in English, something that surprised the little one. With all the affection that Martina had for no one else, she made it clear that the creature was Mommy's Lily, a lily that would live a very long life. With this simple gesture, the connection between the sacred beast and its caretaker had intensified even more. Touching her daughter's paw gently, our girl promised to always protect her and ensure that she would have a long life. Miel and Louise watched the scene with a certain fondness. Louise picked up an empty lilywood, commenting that the princess's sacred beast had a great appetite since it drank all of that quickly and offered to prepare another. Meanwhile, Miel informed the girl that the news about Lily's birth had already reached the prince and the other nobles. Moreover, he had heard that Mayfield's sacred beast had also been born that day, something that didn't seem to impact the protagonist's mood much. Suddenly, Lily spoke up, questioning if that young man was her father. The word father echoed in the room quickly, leaving both of them awkward. Miel, in particular, turned as red as a tomato from nervousness, but with a sad expression, almost as if he were disappointed for not being the father, he explained that this was not the case. And Martina couldn't help but jab at him, saying that if he were really the father, he would spend his life being disturbed by both his wife and his own daughter. That would make him a doormat. Trying to ignore that, Miel commented that the princess knew he had been single his whole life. Poor guy, he's stuck waiting for Martina to give him a chance. Then turning to Lily, he explained that although he was not her father, he was a servant of her mother, and that the thing the princess liked to do most in her free time was to tease him. The creature didn't understand any of these words, and the princess covered her ears, telling Miel to stop teaching the child the wrong things. The blonde questioned if the name of the sacred beast was Lily, and innocently, the creature introduced herself. This allowed her mother to take the opportunity to introduce Miel by name, asking the little one to call him that from then on. She couldn't be happier with that creature in her lap. After placing her in the crib, Martina asked if Miel had investigated Louise as she requested, and the young man explained that he checked the history of all the servants the princess had. He then became curious to know why she was so suddenly worried about a specific person, and staring at the bottle that the woman had prepared for her daughter with suspicion, she remembered that Louise was not loyal to your majesty, remembering when the maid kissed her cheek and how the prophet's assistant informed her that she was not loyal. That's why the girl speculated that the person responsible for poisoning her egg in her past life had been Louise. And in this life, she protected the egg as if it were her own life, so that there would be no chance of that happening. Perhaps the girl had been blackmailed or bought by her brother, but she couldn't help but wonder why the girl would have changed her mind to support Mayfield since she had passed the investigation when she became her maid. This made the princess even more suspicious that something must have happened to her without Martina knowing. With all this in mind, the protagonist ordered Miel to check what had been happening with Louise lately, informing that from then on, she would personally monitor Lily's food and water. Miel didn't understand the reason for all that suspicion and suggested that if the girl really thought the maid was problematic, it would be better to fire her. However, Martina argued that if she simply fired an employee without justification, her reputation would only worsen. But if she truly wanted to defeat her older brother and make Lily the sacred beast of that empire, she had to focus on being a great mother. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the creature's bottle was boiling, until it was opened even with all its contents intact, by the maid who had a mysterious vial in her hands. She had been threatened by the prince's servant who shouted asking if perhaps Louise was daring to challenge the villainess. For if the princess found out what she had done in the past, she would surely send 10 fierce dogs after the girl to eat her alive. And scared, the maid begged him not to reveal anything. Then, handing the vial to Louise, he instructed her to follow his directions. Now the girl trembled, unable to believe what she was doing. She pours the contents of the vial into the baby bottle and quickly takes it to the princess's room, informing her that the milk had been heated and would be ready for the child's consumption in about half an hour. She was already preparing to leave when Martina slammed the book she was reading shut, showing her anger. And then, before the girl could leave the room, she stated that she wanted the maid's help with something, causing Louise to widen her eyes, not knowing what to expect. Louise trembles as she asks how she could help Your Majesty. And then, Martina responds with a serious look that she should drink that liquid, which is enough to make the maid lose her footing. The woman repeats that she had ordered her to drink that, but trying to escape a tragic fate, Louise questions how she could dare to drink the food of the sacred beast. Without further ado, the protagonist approaches the girl, holding her face, and asks why she wouldn't dare to drink the milk she herself prepared, insinuating that the girl might be hiding something. The closer she brought the baby bottle to Louise's lips, the tenser the maid became, not knowing what her fate was. But before making her actually drink the liquid, Martina says that if she doesn't answer her question, she will show the evidence, calling her servants into the room. Then, Miel enters the room with a lady, asking her to be careful. It was the maid's mother, who was extremely surprised to find her there. The lady happily comments that they had delayed to see the palace doctor, and he himself said he could cure her eyes. And all of this, because she was the Princess Martina's maid. The girl was surprised to hear that, and her mother continues, saying that as soon as she was cured, she wouldn't have to cry anymore because of her. The girl's eyes fill with tears as she says that this was great news and she was willing to do anything for her mother's health. Martina begins her speech talking about the family history, about Louise, about how her mother went blind out of nowhere, leading the family to despair. And because of this, the maid stole her ring to pay for her mother's treatment, but she asks her not to worry about that part, because she would only deduct the price of the jewel from her salary. Louise was very scared, and to make sure she had heard everything correctly, she questions if this meant that Martina would not fire her, to which she replies that of course not, despite being known as a villainess in that kingdom. She was also a mother and admired her maid a lot because she did everything for her own progenitor. Louise's eyes shine upon hearing those words. She didn't quite know how to respond to her mistress. And then, in a desperate act of gratitude, she revealed that the milk had been tampered with poison, for someone had tried to assassinate the sacred beast. And then she claims that she would tell everything to her mistress. Amidst tears, she says that it was all her fault. Trying to ease the situation a bit, Martina explains that she would wait for the girl to hear more about the matter, but she tells her to take the opportunity to go for a walk with her mother, whom she probably hadn't seen in a long time and surely missed. Obeying her orders, the girl leaves the room with her mother. After being alone with the girl, Miel confesses that he was surprised she hadn't punished Louise directly. And instead of doing that, she asked the boy to look for her mother, something that was very out of character for the princess. She quickly turns around, questioning if he was insinuating that she was some kind of disrespectful monarch. And the boy smiled, saying that wasn't quite what he meant. However, for Martina, that was what Miel's eyes revealed. They turned to each other, affirming with certainty that she would do many more things that would surprise him. And all he needed to do was wait for them to come. The girl walked out beaming, happy that her plan had worked. However, Miel did not share the same expression. It was as if he were worried about something. And all of this was because, despite Martina definitely being the same person, her personality was changing drastically. If she were really the princess of the past, she would never give another chance to someone who tried to betray her trust. And if anyone tried to offend her in any way, they would end up losing their life. In fact, the girl had already made countless enemies just because of her strong personality. She was called a villain and even a witch within the social circles of nobles and even commoners. Although she had a cute side, That side was only known to Miel, and perhaps he was bothered that other people were getting to know a side that was previously only for him. Therefore, the young man wondered about the reason for such a drastic change, considering it all to be the result of the birth of the sacred beast, even though it seemed like a very sudden change. He couldn't help but think that something might have happened to Martina that he didn't know about, even though the girl entrusted all her secrets to him. Over time, the news that two sacred beasts were born on the same day and hour eventually reached the ears of the nobles, causing a murmur within the Moran Empire. This was because these creatures had a unique method of reproduction. When the old emperor reached the end of his life, the current sacred beast would lay an egg. This egg was given to its heir, and if he was legitimate, the beast would successfully hatch from the egg. However, if the heir failed to hatch that egg, his little creature would die, and he would be considered someone of dirty blood. Because of this, failing to hatch your sacred beast was punishable as a true crime. Martina and Mayfield's father, who was the current emperor, became extremely ill for 2 years, and thus his sacred beast gave rise to 2 eggs, which meant that both of his children were legitimate heirs. And this was the first time something like this had happened in history. Because of this, the Council of Nobles decided that the person who managed to hatch their sacred beast's egg first would inherit the throne. However, the real problem was that the eggs hatched at the same time. A carriage arrives at the palace, leaving Martina accompanied by Miel and her sacred beast. The secretary helps the girl down and takes the opportunity to ask if, by any chance, she was nervous about the whole situation. This was because she was there to formally attend the Council of Nobles for the first time, and there were many people who did not like her in that space and wanted to remove her from the royal family by any means. The girl did not seem bothered when she commented that none of those snobbish nobles believed that the terrible princess would be able to hatch her sacred beast's egg, and they might even blame Lily. And Miel couldn't help but comment that this was also the first time he saw his princess so depressed. Perhaps for that reason, he decided to give a word of encouragement, stating that in his heart she was like a cargo carriage ready to tackle any problem that came her way. And with the usual good humor they had, the girl asked if that meant he didn't even consider her human. Miel seemed hopelessly in love with Martina, saying that her smile was enough to give him all the courage he needed, so she just needed to keep that expression to ward off all the difficulties that approached her. Inside the council, things were already prepared for the meeting. In fact, Mayfield Moran was already seated with his new pet, while it was announced that he had successfully completed the process of hatching the egg. But his sister, Martina Moran, had also managed to hatch her sacred beast. The noble in charge informs that according to imperial tradition, the heir who hatches the egg first must inherit the throne. He was Matthew Douglas, the head of justice, responsible for leading the meeting, and adds that never in history had 2 eggs hatched at the same time. Therefore, to choose the new heir, the nobles would need to find a middle ground. Together with Your Majesty, the current emperor. The young man coughs, trying to disguise his illness as much as possible, saying that he didn't know how much longer he could endure that farce. And beside his wife, Isabel, who did not seem happy at all, he questioned the children, if, by any chance, any of them had proven to be more worthy than the other. And of course, Mayfield was the first to speak, saying that his sister should withdraw from the competition, because a few days ago, during a banquet, she embarrassed a noblewoman to defend some mercenary, which was a sign of immense insolence from that princess, who would surely bring disgrace to the royal family. But Lily quickly spoke up, shouting for the man to stop saying bad things about her mother. The beast accompanying Mayfield glared at her angrily, and the two were already ready to fight right there, because they didn't hold back at all. But Lily still did not let herself be shaken, telling her brother that before ruining her reputation, he should explain a small thing first, showing the baby bottle of her child. Mayfield maintains her pose of being clueless, pretending she didn't understand why she brought a ridiculous baby bottle to that place, which was not a problem for Martina, who took pleasure in revealing that her own servant had been blackmailed and forced to poison Lily using that baby bottle poisoned with a magical powder. Of course, that alone did not prove that Mayfield had done anything, but the woman had taken that potion for analysis, and the recipe used to make the poison only existed among the wizards who were under Mayfield's command, and that is why a prince who was willing to directly harm the sacred beast was not fit to inherit the crown. Courageously, Martina raised her serious eyes to her brother with a penetrating gaze and asked if he did not agree with that. The murmurs among the noble wolves began. It was madness to think that the prince would be capable of doing such a thing. After all, the sacred beast had nothing to do with his sister, but rather with the vitality of the empire itself. That is why the princess should be chosen, despite her reputation being at least problematic. In the midst of all that confusion, their father asked everyone to be quiet, giving Mayfield the chance to say something in her defense if she wanted to. It was as if the young man was not prepared for all of that. He explained that his wizard was waiting outside the council, so he asked his guards to take him away. Martina was serious, attentive to every movement of her brother. for in her past life, he had used magic to end Lily. So who knows, in this life, the protagonist might be able to finish him off for good. She clings to the sacred beast, which senses the concern in that atmosphere, and the door slowly opens, bringing even more suspense to it all. The wizard finally enters accompanied by the other guards. He had his head down, as if he had something to hide. Mayfield goes straight to the point, saying that his sister accused someone of trying to poison her sacred beast, and the formula of the potion was solely under the control of that wizard, which was very pertinent evidence. And that is why the prince wanted to know what the guy thought. Finally, he speaks up, fallen to his knees on the ground, confessing that it was he who made the potion. However, he acted alone, reaffirming that Prince Mayfield knew nothing about it. He surrenders, acknowledging that trying to kill the sacred beast was something unforgivable, and that he would pay with his life to prove Mayfield's innocence. His action was quick. He himself used a spell that instantly covered him in flames, shocking everyone there. Martina and Lily stared at the scene with distrust and horror, not knowing what was happening, and the fire began to take over the place, causing the guards to run to protect Gardner. The other nobles were also frightened, wanting to leave because they did not understand what was happening. The fire diminished, leaving only the remnants of that sorcerer. The shock was so great that people could only stare, scared. The flames kept diminishing more and more, and even in the midst of all that chaos, Mayfield still smiled confidently. And with a satisfied look, he tells his dear sister that he had avenged her, asking if she was satisfied now. But Martina shouted that she was not, for they could not prove anything just with the words of that wizard. Deep down, she could not accept that her brother was indeed capable of sacrificing a precious wizard just for his own good, erasing the evidence of his crime. The cough of their father draws attention, and Isabel asks her daughter to leave things as they are, for her father was already very tired, so it was better to conclude at least for the day. The girl looked visibly worried, staring at all that. She hated that theater of her family. To further insult her, her mother made a point of saying that she did not believe her brother was capable of hurting her so directly. Thus, with a sad expression, Isabel decides that the issue of the successor to the throne would be the topic of the council for the following month. But now it was better to retreat. Quickly, the nobles disperse, returning to their activities. Just like Martina, who leaves with him slowly. But she is stopped by her brother. Maliciously, Mayfield asks if she did not think they were very similar. Both proud, very skilled, and eager to deal the final blow to each other. In fact, they shared the same cold and lifeless gaze. The girl thinks for a moment before responding, turning to her brother, with a frightening look before saying that if he did not like those eyes, he could tear them out at any moment. Mayfield changes his tone, stating that his father was weak and his mother had no real power. Furthermore, 70% of the noble houses considered his commands. The Order of Knights also served, and the wizards had allied with him through a contract. Therefore, he knew that only a small thing was missing for him to become the pinnacle of that nation. For Mayfield, all that was left was to get his sister's eyes embedded in his crown like real jewels, and perhaps even turn Lily, whom he referred to as a little bunny, into a pair of gloves. This last threat makes Martina push the boy away. The girl was visibly upset, saying that her brother always liked to steal the things that belonged to them, but this time it would be him who would lose everything. For some reason, this does not frighten Mayfield at all. In fact, all he does is comment that he was waiting to hear those cries for help from his sister. When he finally leaves the palace, in the carriage, the atmosphere is tense. She was by Mia's side, head down with the whole situation, not saying a word. This is because her brother could trigger unreachable triggers in the girl, reminding her of her past life. In that life where Lily was indeed poisoned by him and Martina was exiled and left to die. Leaning towards her brother ended up giving her a fate worse than death itself. She had to endure the worst things a human being could go through just to get that second chance to save her daughter's life. That is why she was not willing to simply let history repeat itself. Then she finally spoke, telling her faithful secretary that she had thought of something. However, he cuts the seriousness of the conversation by making a cute face along with Lily. This is enough to make the girl laugh for the first time that day, asking what the two were doing. The little creature smiled, satisfied. You could say that Miel Quentin had said that if they acted that way, their mother would smile. Very cute. The sacred beast asks Martina not to be sad about what happened that day, and explains that Miel told her that it was to make her happy. Smiling innocently, hearing her own daughter ask her not to be sad struck a very sensitive place in Martina, who lowered her head again. And because of this, Lily questioned what was wrong. Amid tears, the protagonist explains that she was afraid her brother would manage to hurt her and take Lily from her arms because she couldn't protect her. But she was not afraid of that now, and she carefully picked up the creature in her lap, before saying that her heart had filled with courage when she saw the creature's smile, stating that there was nothing she couldn't do as long as her daughter was with her. Optimistic, Lily asserts that she would always be with Martina, asking again for her not to cry. and the protagonist thanks her for the affection, commenting on how soft the little one's fur was, which made her comment that it was like a scarf for the woman. Miel observes the scene silently, but with a satisfied smile as if he were truly happy with his life. This is because he was willing to show her that she possessed all the power necessary to protect those she loved. 10 years earlier, the two siblings were being forced to share a meal as always downcast and quiet in their own world. When Miel brought another plate for the girl, Martina glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, commenting that he was very handsome. But Miel ended up not hearing properly and asked her to repeat, please. To which she replied that his eyes were very beautiful, like the grass in the garden. Mayfield interjects in the conversation, asking if she had really used such a vulgar metaphor, and suggesting that her tutor was an idiot who also had no manners. The comment ends up upsetting Miel, and he withdraws, before saying that he was grateful and honored to receive such a compliment from the princess. But Martina asks him not to be shy and just ignore her idiot brother. Being called that in front of a servant does not make Mayfield happy at all. And later that day when he was in his quarters, Miel had to bring water to the boy, who grabbed the cup roughly, throwing it far away onto the floor. The little boy got nervous and was ready to pick up the shards, asking if the prince was hurt. But all Mayfield did was ask if at least he knew how many other servants could be bought with that cup that Miel had broken. This left the little boy confused, and he tried to defend himself, saying that he hadn't broken anything. After all, it was all the prince's fault. But Mayfield didn't want to hear any of that, and he called his men to break Miel's arms and legs. They entered without hesitation, ready to follow those orders, pulling the boy and striking at his limbs. He was trembling on the ground, immobilized, completely surrendered to Mayfield, a scene with horrible sadism, laughing at something a child shouldn't like to see. When one of Mayfield's men stepped on his hand, Miel screamed in pain. She was completely destroyed, bleeding. The shoe marks were evident on Miel's white skin, and her hand was spasming from the pain. Luckily, or perhaps by fate, Martina heard everything and quickly opened the door, ordering to release the servant. Her expression was one of such rage, as if Miel and she had been friends for years. Mayfield justifies his actions, saying that the servant had broken his glass and therefore deserved to be mistreated. But the girl argues that he had hundreds of glasses, so 99 were enough for him to drink water until the day of his death. The boy couldn't believe that his sister would actually rebel for a servant who was as low as the grass on the ground. But that didn't matter to the girl. She argued that even if he were indeed grass, she wouldn't just ignore that absurdity. Then she turned her back on her brother, heading towards Miel, who opened her eyes, somewhat unsure of what to expect from that transformation. At that moment, the girl extended her hand, asking if he would like to become his own servant, and promising that if he did so, she would protect him without thinking of the times. Thus, Miel raised one of her uninjured hands to the girl, holding her in a gesture of desperation and gratitude. Their clasped hands were like a silent agreement that everything would be all right. After that, in the girl's room, she commented to a new servant that sooner or later she would cut her brother into pieces and flush them down the toilet. The way the two were acting was very different, as Miel remained downcast. It was then that she decided to thank Your Highness for saving her from her brother, and she made it clear that she didn't like Mayfield and thought he was a lunatic. And she still promised the boy that the physiotherapist would take a look at his hand so he could use it again soon. Miel was awkward and stated that she would greatly reward the princess's kindness. But as a good monarch, she asked what the boy could do, especially since he was now her servant. And all he needed to do was obey her orders from then on. And that was something Miel could do. Then the boy explained that in the future he would wear glasses, so that his eyes, which she thought were so beautiful, would only be seen by Martino. That made her blush. She didn't quite know how to respond to boys at that age, so she just turned around saying she could do whatever she wanted, but that from then on she would command and uncommand Miel, who assured that she would obey everything without complaint. Returning to the present, that boy who had been Martina's companion since then asked what she planned to do next regarding her brother. After all, Mayfield had immense power in his hands, and many other wizards had already signed contracts with him. However, according to her investigations, most of those sorcerers associated with Mayfield had a mediocre level of skills. So if her boss could sign a contract with a high-level wizard, it would greatly help her reputation. Thus, Martina explained that she agreed and needed to find a very strong wizard to become her assistant, or her brother would continue using magic to hurt Lily. But she confessed that she wasn't planning to look for someone who was already a high-level magician. Instead, she would look for something else. Or rather, for someone who would become a legendary level wizard in the future. And she already knew very well who that was. A few days later, Martina was looking for Lily inside her room, and she warned that she would need to leave that day, so the little one would occupy herself playing with Miel. She was already starting to consider that the creature wasn't in the room when a wardrobe door creaked open, revealing Lily, who had sparkling eyes during her play. Suddenly, the little one jumped towards her mother to show that she was there, and ended up knocking her down to the floor. She explained that she wanted to play hide and seek with Martina, who replied that she would also love to do that, but that day she had something very important to do. A little window appeared, congratulating the princess for caring about her daughter, and explained that now she could give a little more energy for Lily to grow. Miel pulled her from the protagonist's lap, who promised to bring some toys from her outing for her, and the servant asks the girl not to worry, as he would take great care of the sacred beast. She was more concerned about the toys she would receive. The two talk briefly, and Martina explains that she would meet the wizard that day, because if she could sign a contract with him, her daughter wouldn't have to worry about the black magic her brother used. Then she says goodbye, wishing both of them a good day. And Lily looks at the butler seriously, before calling him, and he responds immediately, asking what it was. The little creature asks if, by any chance, the young man would like to go with his mother to the city. This makes him a bit curious, as he didn't know what was driving this desire. But the sacred beast reveals that every time Martina left, he would stare at her deeply. Miel looks at Lily for a moment, thinking about what to say to such a wise creature. And when he finally responds, he explains that giving everything of himself to Martina always brought him a happiness that was enough, and he didn't feel entitled to ask for anything more. Changing the subject, he perks up, asking which game Lily would like to start, suggesting that they could draw together, something that excites the sacred beast to the point of her forgetting her earlier question. Far away, at the inn, the princess was descending with her carriage. One of the staff informs her that the owner of the inn said that the mercenary she had spoken to recently was not present, something that Martina finds very strange, because the day before, she had sent him a letter asking him to meet her at the wizard's tower that same day. As she couldn't afford to waste much time, she decided to go meet her wizard right away, telling the coachman to hurry. Even so, from inside the carriage, she couldn't help but think that Ryan's sudden disappearance was suspicious. But she was also disappointed because she had planned to use their meeting to ask for another pledge of loyalty from Ryan so that Lily could grow a little more. This disappearance made her think that perhaps the mercenary had only acted on impulse the other night and regretted offering help to a woman as wicked as they saw her in the kingdom. In any case, she had already made a request to visit the wizard's tower, so she would worry about finding Ryan later. At that moment in time, the future legendary wizard, Phoenix, was just an ordinary student inside the magic tower. In fact, his family was entirely of commoners, and during his stay at the school, he was not very recognized. However, years later, Phoenix wrote in his memoir that on the day Martina was going to visit him, he had been framed by other students and expelled from the magic tower. The school was enormous, with beautiful architecture, and in one of the classrooms, one of the teachers was yelling at poor Phoenix, asking if that was really the final project he wanted to submit, explaining very angrily that the task was to freeze some element of fire using ice, but the boy had frozen a fly, which was absurd to him. In front of the whole class, the young man humiliated the poor student, calling him trash and questioning whether he really thought he deserved to be studying in the Tower of Wizards. The boy was very angry and confidently stated that he had submitted a project with a frozen element of fire, so someone must have swapped his last-minute submission, but the teacher didn't believe him. It was too impossible for him to imagine that any noble classmate of that poor commoner would have bothered to swap projects with him. The whispers in the classroom didn't stop, and all the other students seemed satisfied with the scolding the boy was receiving. One of the arrogant students caught the teacher's attention, stating that even the scrolls Phoenix used to do his assignments were terrible and would go straight into their trash bins. So there was no reason for a noble to steal anything from that boy. Another young man made a point of humiliating Phoenix, saying that he had to rummage through the trash to finish his assignments and worked in the school kitchen just to buy his uniform. So there was no reason for someone like him to be learning about magic, questioning whether he thought learning the same things as the nobles would lead him anywhere in life. The teacher was already fed up with that boy, saying that the Tower of Wizards would not tolerate a student like him, and since he had already given a prior warning, if he made any more mistakes, he would be expelled. And so, from that day on, Phoenix would no longer be a student of the Tower of Wizards. And this statement made his world collapse, but he tried to hold back his tears, taking his work back and acknowledging the punishment he had been given. But it makes it clear that even if he was no longer a student there, he would continue learning more about magic. And by disintegrating the parchment in his hands, he makes it clear that he would create a type of magic that none of the men in that room had seen before. The professor, however, did not believe this, accusing the boy of having a hallucination. After all, that school was the pinnacle of magic. But he decides not to argue further with the boy, telling him to pack his things and leave soon, for that was not a place for people like him. Attention is interrupted by a woman who quickly enters the room, whispering something in the professor's ear, something that leaves him unsure how to react. And then he asks Phoenix to wait for a moment. The boy turns suspiciously, hearing the professor say that an exceptional guest had requested to visit the magic tower. In the hallways, The three walked while the guy explained that she wanted to be a sponsor for the boy, and making it clear that she was someone extremely noble. And before they entered the place where they would meet this guest, he tells him to be careful with his words and not to say anything rude that could offend her. When the student finally lays eyes on the guest, it's as if a portal opened in front of him. For there was Martina, introducing herself as the imperial princess in front of that very simple boy. The professor hurriedly introduces Phoenix to the woman. He also states that there were several other students within the academy who deserved much more support than he did, revealing that he had already violated the rules of the Wizard Tower 3 times and even stole the belongings of a noble student, and then warns that if Martina were indeed to provide any support to him, it would likely affect her reputation. His words make the boy let out an ironic laugh, and he confesses to having stolen a classmate's homework, but since it was only worth 23 points in the average, he didn't even know why he did it. He is soon reprimanded by the professor, who tells him to be quiet because he had no right to mock a noble person. Martina knew that this was the day the boy would be expelled from that school. When this happened in the story, Phoenix returned to his village where he lived and spent a good amount of time as an ordinary peasant. But despite not having the necessary magical materials or teachers to guide him in that village, he never set aside sorcery. In fact, he practiced using everything he could find in the fields, and in return for this devotion, sorcery did not abandon him either. The boy was able to do incredible things, even with few materials. Moreover, because of his stubbornness, Phoenix managed to create several new spells, leaving the entire academy shocked. Because of this, the wizards regretted it and called him back to the school. Therefore, Martina believed that if she could keep the student within the Wizard Tower using her sponsorship, he would become a genius even faster. Interrupting the two's silly discussion, she asked the professor to give her some time alone with the student, something that he clearly would not deny. After all, he was in front of a princess. But before leaving, he reinforces that Phoenix should behave, even when alone with her. Finally, the two are face to face in a deafening silence, and Phoenix looks at Martina suspiciously. After all, he didn't know exactly why she wanted to sponsor him. The princess breaks the silence, making it clear that she would cover any expenses he had within the school, and no matter what difficulties he encountered along the way, he could always count on her. Moreover, she didn't care what those noble snobs thought, she only wanted to know about him. And getting closer, which clearly made that boy nervous, she asked if Phoenix would accept her as his sponsor. The boy lowers his head, pondering all of this. Before saying anything, he removes his cloak, leaving Martina very confused. When he started to take off the other pieces, she began to get a little nervous and questioned why he was doing this. The woman was already desperate, telling him to wait, because Phoenix was already very excited about all of this. She closes her eyes and asks if he really thought she wanted that kind of relationship with her student, making it clear that she had no intention of doing anything with him and telling him to get dressed quickly. It was then that the boy revealed his torso, all marked with scars, explaining that he just wanted to show her what his last sponsor did to him. The princess opened her eyes instantly, shocked by all of this. When she asked if that person had hit Phoenix, the teenager replied that this sponsor was a lord who deeply hated magic, and in fact, what he wanted was a magic slave. Only that, since most of the wizards were nobles, he couldn't do that. However, for this man's luck and Phoenix's misfortune, he was just an ordinary magic student. When he went to school, he said he would sponsor him in exchange for his services. But every time the boy used magic, he was brutally tortured by this man. Therefore, pulling Martina's delicate hands, he asked if he could ask a question. And placing that hand on his chest full of bruises, he questioned whether by any chance she intended to do the same to him. The boy was being so real with his feelings that the princess was in complete shock. It was a feeling of great confusion. After all, the boy couldn't simply trust her, but he also wanted her help very much. If one were to make an analogy, it was as if he were a stray cat that had been through a lot. But if that were the case, she would only need to enchant him using a toy mouse. Of course, metaphorically. Therefore, putting his shirt back on, the protagonist stated that she knew that, regardless of what she said, he wouldn't believe her. So, she decided to make a proposal that would be a bit more advantageous for the boy. Every time he completed one of his goals, she would sponsor him for a year, and the first of them would be to create a kind of portable magic fountain. Phoenix soon became euphoric, asking how she knew that this was the boy's research. And he didn't even let her answer because he himself had stopped researching since he didn't have enough magical material. So, he gave up. Trying to touch on a deeper place within the boy, Martina explained that this winter had been terribly cold, and because of that, many people from the place where Phoenix came froze to death. So, she was thinking about that same purpose. After all, as the princess of the empire, she wanted people to have a comfortable winter, just like she had in the palace. That's why she really wanted the boy to accept and continue that research in her name. Phoenix had nothing to say. He stared at that woman he didn't even know in shock, but he soon perked up, like a stray kitten seeing a toy mouse. and he asked if she could get the materials, taking the opportunity to mention that there were other students stealing his things. So he would really like to move to a room alone, but he quickly apologized for making so many requests. However, Martina didn't mind. After all, she herself referred to herself as the most infamous princess in the kingdom, and there was nothing she couldn't do. Then, she winked conspiratorially at the boy, who finally seemed to feel comfortable. He laughed, saying that, by the way, he was also the most hated student by all the teachers there, so he would really like to be by her side. Quickly, he approached Martina, pulling her hand and explaining that he had heard that kissing someone else's hand was a way to show loyalty, but apparently this was a gesture made by knights. So he preferred to ask if he could do that with the girl before advancing to her hand. The protagonist was shocked and a bit awkward, because she hadn't imagined that Phoenix would be so much like a kitten or a puppy in that way. She didn't know how he had managed to get that kiss of loyalty so quickly, but now that it was happening, all that was left was to enjoy it. Thus, Phoenix placed a soft kiss on her hands with the utmost devotion. Martina could swear she was dreaming, because she didn't expect that boy to be so quick in his actions. However, the little window made it clear that despite being one of the pillars of the nation, his loyalty wasn't quite sincere. This left the protagonist a bit disappointed, because that meant that the act of sincerity was a huge lie. And staring at her new sponsored student, the princess wondered if that future wizard was also great at pretending. Even so, she smiled, because that would be an interesting partnership. Moving a little away from the girl, Phoenix asked if in the future he could request some research materials using her name. Out of nowhere, someone entered the room, quickly pulling the boy by the collar of his shirt. It was Ryan, with his usual ogre-like demeanor, lifting the boy and saying that this wouldn't be possible. Martina shouted, reprimanding him, and asking why he had only shown up at that moment, as she had gone to the inn to fetch him and hadn't found him, so she needed to know where he had been. Something that the man didn't answer, only stating that Phoenix was a dangerous guy. He was already ready to draw his sword, saying that if Martina allowed that boy to be by her side, he would surely put her at risk. And with a dark look, he made it clear that with the princess's permission, he could eliminate Phoenix once and for all at that moment. The boy does not fall behind and begins to chant his protective magic, fearful of that mercenary. But the princess knew that Phoenix was just any magic student. What made her wary was that even the teachers within that school could not see the boy's talent. So why and how did Ryan manage to? Was there some kind of special connection between the pillars of that nation? Like a kind of survival instinct among the powerful beasts that sustained the empire? Without waiting for Martina to say anything, Ryan advances on the boy, saying that if she could not make that decision, he had no problem with it. Phoenix was clearly nervous. After all, he had a sharp blade very close to his shoulders. But before that pathetic battle could begin, Martina shouts for both of them to stop, and they stare at the girl out of the corner of their eyes, not knowing what to do. The princess was clearly stressed and said that both of them were loyal to her, which made them her servants. And none of her servants could act without her permission beforehand. Phoenix quickly strikes a good guy pose, saying he was very scared of the situation and apologizing to her. The girl pulls him, telling him to follow, as she would talk to her teachers about how she could provide some support to him. After ensuring that his new quarters and research materials would be taken care of, she asks if there was anything else the boy wanted, but he declines, as just having materials to continue researching was more than enough. Before leaving, she looks at Ryan coldly, reprimanding him with a glance. He was also not happy with this situation at all, but she asks him to calm down and meet her at the carriage once he was more at ease. Before leaving the room, Phoenix sticks his tongue out at the mercenary, mocking him, and then he finally closed the door, leaving Ryan alone in that room full of hatred. He no longer knew what to do to protect his princess. Besides being upset because he had provoked anger in the girl, because of his impulsiveness, he let himself be carried away. The mercenary had an immense desire to kill anyone who might be a threat to the girl. It was as if he were going insane. Since the day he swore to be loyal to the princess, he began to dream of Martina every day. And look, I don't know if there is therapy in this universe, but he should seek some. He remembered one of those dreams where he saw Martina with a cloak, as if she were hiding, revealing all her beauty only to him. He remembered how he would wake up confused about the true identity of this woman in his dreams. After all, in real life, Martina did not have short hair, but there were more pressing matters to worry about. He needed to find out, because every time the two were apart, he felt an intense pain in his chest. That only stopped when he was fighting someone. Amidst these daydreams, searching for an answer, Ryan wondered if perhaps this feeling was a result of the royal blood curse, that despite giving him many powers, also turned him into a maniac who could hardly control himself. Almost never. Presently, the boy was staring at Martina and Phoenix from the window. To try to forget a bit of this pain, he ended up taking on more mercenary missions, because only physical exhaustion and a lot of cold water could calm him down. Remembering Martina, who no longer left his mind, the boy wondered how he could simply pretend to be a normal person amidst so much. Meanwhile, outside the academy, Martina was waiting for her mercenary. She was satisfied that she at least got to meet the future legendary mage, and she had also decided that she would find out later what his deal was with his promise of loyalty. She was quickly pulled from her thoughts, her eyes widening upon hearing Ryan with a serious expression in front of her, but perhaps a bit more controlled than earlier. She approaches, asking if the boy had managed to calm down, and explains that she knew that even though he had sworn loyalty to her, he would always carry the blood of his family. And she recognized that he was still a prince theoretically, so she respected his wishes greatly. But before the girl could caress his face, he grabs her arm, asserting that this had nothing to do with who he was. And he moves closer to the girl, making it clear that he wanted to belong to Martina, and only her, because he was her servant and wanted to be deeply connected to the girl. Therefore, he made a very unexpected request. He wanted her to carve his name into his skin, which, in my opinion, is an unparalleled madness. Of course, Martina cannot find this kind of request normal, right? After all, he wanted her to write his name on his skin, which is quite strange. But on the other hand, the boy seemed to be very anxious. So if he could do anything to calm his mind a little, it would be better. She pulls a lipstick from her clothing, explaining that since she hadn't brought a pen, she would have to use it. But the boy stops her, pulling her hand, and explains that he didn't want her to use that kind of thing. After all, the lipstick would wear off quickly and wouldn't leave any mark on her body. Martina trembled at the boy's touch, and she screams, telling him to let go as he was hurting her. And so he does. Realizing that he might have gone too far with the girl, Ryan even tried to apologize, confirming that he had made a mistake, but was surprisingly pushed by Martina. He stared at her, not quite knowing what was happening. Then the girl asks if he wanted something that would end his pain, or at least disguise it. Suddenly, the girl pulls one of the roses from the beautiful garden that surrounded them, and states that only a pain greater than the one he was feeling could help him. And then she asked where exactly the mercenary would like the girl's name to be engraved. So he pulls his shirt a little, asking the girl to make the engraving on his chest, which was open just for her. Martina carefully approaches him so that the boy doesn't get scared, and using the thorns of the rose, she begins to make a small cut on his skin. The atmosphere between the two was tense as the girl carved the name into Ryan's chest, who apparently was the most loyal person to her, indeed. And he felt the pain of the thorns on his skin, but said nothing. She was halfway through the name when she stopped, to ask if that sensation didn't tickle or itch, but Ryan gently takes her hand, before saying that he was getting exactly what he deserved. Only the girl disagrees, saying that he didn't need to go through all that pain. It was then that he noticed that Martina's hands were also marked because of the thorns, and licking his wounds, he makes it clear that as long as he was alive, he wouldn't let the girl get hurt again. Martina's eyes sparkled at that phrase, and the little window appeared, informing her that now the boy had confirmed his effective loyalty to her. Also warning that with a real bond between the two, the first kiss transmitted 100% of his energy, but the following ones would reduce by 50%. This completely broke the girl's mood, who didn't understand why it always had to decrease, questioning whether the little window was the one consuming the energy that was diminished. And the system made it clear that this rule was created by the first emperor and the first sacred beast to ensure that the heir could form more bonds within his kingdom and not die with just one kiss. Separating a little from the boy, she reveals that she had something for him, and then she hands him an envelope, informing him that this was his guest seal. So if he ever wanted to visit her one day, he could show it to the guards. But she makes it clear that he could only use that once. He feels a bit disappointed, asking if he could really only visit her once. But the woman says that she just wanted to have a knight to serve her and not a lunatic, informing him that if he proved to be someone better, he might earn other invitations in the future. And then she says goodbye, informing him that they would see each other later, leaving that boy who was completely taken by the princess's charms alone. Staring at that carriage moving further away, Ryan touches his chest carefully, certain that that night would be much better than the others. Inside the carriage, the atmosphere was quite different. Martina was scared because the only knight she had turned out to be a total maniac. She couldn't forget the boy's face while he licked his blood off his hand. In fact, she had prepared 3 invitations for him initially, but this whole visit could make things even worse. She also had more things to think about at that moment, because she would have to learn to deal with Phoenix, who was a lying and treacherous cat. As for Ryan, he was like a crazy dog who could do any kind of craziness out of nowhere. And all this contact made the girl wonder if all the pillars of the nation were so dangerous. All of this was very exhausting for the princess, who just wanted to raise Lily in peace. Back at her castle, she was already heading to her room, and she couldn't even enter before Miel found her to say that Lily seemed to be getting sick. And then a warning came to Martina, who quickly asked what had happened, to which the servant replied that out of nowhere, the little creature's stomach had started to shrink, and she said she was feeling pain because of that. which was very strange since all Lily had eaten that day was milk and nothing else. The woman enters the room worried, asking the creature to let her see what was wrong. The little creature was in extreme suffering and felt its stomach hurting nonstop. She was grunting, making her mother even more worried. Martina gave a little press, asking if it hurt when she did that, but the creature replied that actually the pain was coming from inside. However, the more the princess pressed, the more the creature complained. Martina couldn't help but worry since she had done everything to ensure her beast grew up well. So she asked the little creature not to be afraid as she would find a way to heal it. She would discuss its situation with the doctor and return shortly to be with it. And the little creature responded by grabbing the sleeve of her dress, asking her to really come back soon. The girl left the room, finding Miel right at the door. She confirmed with him that Lily hadn't eaten anything strange that day, but the servant reaffirmed that she had only had milk that morning and he himself had inspected it beforehand. The woman was desperate, already believing in the possibility that she had touched something she shouldn't have or that her brother had sent a wizard there again. She didn't let Miel say anything and bombarded him with questions. She wanted to know if Lily had encountered anyone strange and if the servant had checked all the things the creature had touched because there could be something enchanted there. Trying to contain all that anxiety, the servant pulled her by the shoulders, telling her to calm down. And it was as if reality began to materialize in front of the princess. Trying to stay calm, the servant explained that he had checked all the things Lily had touched and there was nothing suspicious. Moreover, she hadn't had contact with anyone else besides him, and the two had spent the whole day drawing. The protagonist remained silent. There wasn't much to say, but soon she lowered her head, worried about her daughter. Our girl tried to calm down, remembering that she was in the imperial palace and that she was still a princess of that empire, so she had everything she needed to protect the little one. In the embrace of the two, Miel comforted her, saying that she hadn't lost Lily, especially since the girl had found the person who had tried to poison her daughter before, so she had succeeded in her task of protecting her. He also explained that the sacred beasts were products of magic, so human doctors wouldn't be able to do much. Therefore, after Martina calmed down, they would take Lily to see a sorcerer, something the princess agreed to, explaining that she had panicked earlier. At that moment, Miel acted more like a friend than a servant, and thus made it clear that he was doing a great job, but couldn't help but wonder silently if he was the only man with whom she became so vulnerable. He was about to close the embrace with his hands because he wanted to get a little closer to her. However, the girl pulled away, asking what was wrong because he was very quiet. But Miel gave an awkward laugh, saying it was nothing serious. Suddenly, one of his maids appeared in the hallway calling for the princess, and she explained that the queen was requesting her presence. Martina had no idea why her mother wanted to see her since this wasn't very common, especially in such a desperate moment like that. But she couldn't just say no, so she asked Miel to take care of Lily and to help draft a letter to send to the Tower of Wizards. Noticing that he hadn't moved, she questioned what the boy was staring at and asked if he had heard what she told him to do. That shout was enough to make Miel's eyes widen, asking her not to worry, making it clear that he would take care of everything while Martina grumbled that if he didn't deliver that letter, he would be punished by massaging her shoulder for an entire month, which wasn't a problem. Miel would do that without complaining for a year, and he watched the two of them leave. He pulled a strand of Martina's hair that had stayed on his shoulder during the embrace, smelling it fondly, even though it was a bit strange to do. A little further away from the queen's chambers, the princess entered looking for her mother and immediately asking if her father was having any problems. Her mother was serious, sitting in the chair, just waiting for the girl. With tired eyes, she asked Martina to sit beside her, and so she does. In her past life, when she was accused of a very serious crime and exiled to the border, she spent some time in a cell living like a dirty rat, the matter of visiting her once. She was already sick, and her voice was almost a caress on the face. To be honest, Martina barely heard what the woman said. She only remembered one phrase. With tears streaming down her face, Martina's mother cried out to her as her child. After that, when she was in exile and when she fled, she had some news about her mother. She managed to find out through some whispers among the population that she had died. At that moment, Martina wished she could have gone through the mourning differently and heard it from another mouth. But now, with the woman alive in front of her, the situation was different, and her mother asked her not to hold a grudge against her, something Martina did not understand. The context. Then the woman explains that in the Council of Nobles, she could not choose in favor of one child or another because she represented the will of that nation and her husband, so she could not be selfish. Hearing that, the princess immediately stands up, outraged, saying that if that was the issue, she didn't need to worry because she held no resentment against anyone. Despite Mayfield being a lunatic, she was sure she wouldn't lose to him and had other things to do. However, before she could leave the room, her mother quickly pulled her back, remembering when the two brothers were close as children and asking if there was any way they could return to having that good relationship. After all, Mayfield only got stressed with the girl because she never listened to him. She really wanted her to stop fighting with her brother because they were family, and if this continued, she would probably be very hurt by the boy. But Martina was not afraid. In fact, she was very brave and stated with killer eyes that before he even thought of attacking, she would cut his head off. This statement leaves her mother speechless, and Martina pulls her arm away to leave quickly. The woman tries to argue, saying she didn't want the two to ruin themselves this way, and informs her that next month the prince of the Heathning Empire would visit them, and he would propose a political marriage for the two. The protagonist turns to her mother in shock and argues that her kingdom has always had problems with the Seaning Empire, so she didn't understand why they were seeking a political marriage now. The disputes between the two houses had been going on for hundreds of years, and even the commoners of those nations hated each other. This is also why, after Lion's mother married the Emperor of Xianing, she was hated by her own people, in addition to being despised by the subjects. The poor woman ended up suffering a terrible death in the midst of this crossfire. Not knowing exactly what to expect, Martina asks her mother a rather bold question. She wanted her to explain if it was her wish for the protagonist to become the second imperial advisor of the other nation. But the lady responds, offended, stating that her daughter always expected the worst from people, and that as her mother, she would never be capable of hurting her. Then she explains that the desire to make this political marriage came from the second prince of Seaning, and from what she heard, he was a very elegant and noble young man. The problem is that Martina did not agree with this at all, and made a point of pulling her mother's hands away from hers to disagree with her. With a dark expression, the protagonist asserts that the sacred beast could only be raised within the Morand Empire. So if she married this prince, what would happen to Lily? The woman is serious when she states that she was also a mother and would never leave her child behind. Her words seem to surprise the Empress, who is left speechless. Then the girl turns her back, saying that Lily was sick, so she needed to leave, stating that if her mother had any time, she could visit her granddaughter whenever she wanted. And finally, she left the Empress there, silent, unable to believe her daughter's words. The lady keeps her head down, not knowing where she went wrong with Martina. And now, amidst tears, she knew she had no other choice. One of her maids consoled her while the woman lamented having to see her own children fighting until one of them was destroyed. But the maid tried to calm her, reminding her that the most important thing now was to take care of her health. Thus, she tries to guide the Empress to bed so she could rest a little, assuring her that things would be a bit better when she woke up. Meanwhile, far away from there, Lily was grumbling that she was still feeling strange. Martina held her like a true baby, asking her not to be afraid because her mother had already taken care of everything, and a wizard was on the way to treat the creature. She made a charm asking her mother to hold her for a little longer because according to her, when she was in Martina's arms, she no longer felt pain, a request that the protagonist fulfilled without even thinking twice. After all, she didn't intend to go anywhere. She just wanted to be by the girl's side to take care of her. Time passed and the fall of night arrived at the palace. Even after that entire afternoon, Martina remained there with Lily resting in her lap. It was then that Miel entered the room, approaching the two. She didn't even let the servant say anything, and immediately asked if the letter she requested had been sent to the Tower of Wizards. She couldn't trust the Court of Sorcerers too much after all. They had sworn an oath to her brother. Therefore, at that moment, only Phoenix could treat Lily. Then, Miel explained that she had sent one of her guards to fetch the fastest horse to deliver the document. So, if everything had gone well, he would be back in an instant. The young man observed that little creature sleeping so peacefully in her mother's arms. But they were soon interrupted by some knocks on the door, and Martina authorized the entrance. Lily introduced herself, making it clear that she had delivered the paper that Martina sent to the wizard Phoenix, and the princess immediately bombarded her with questions about where the boy was then, because the letter said he was supposed to come with her. To which the knight replied that it was at Phoenix's request that she first inform everything that had happened on her expedition, and also asked her to look out the window. That was very strange, and the girl wondered if perhaps he intended to climb or what. It was as if suddenly a small beam of light appeared in front of the glass, followed by a great explosion like a true fireworks show, and this ended up waking the sacred beast, which slowly opened its eyes, asking what that sound was. When she realized it was fireworks, the girl couldn't help but be amazed. The sky was covered with those fireworks, and one of them even formed the shape of a very cute kitten. Martina smiled with her daughter in her hands and asked if she liked that, something that Lily confirmed without even thinking twice. It was then that she understood. So in the letter she had sent, she informed the wizard that she would be taking care of a very small child. The princess couldn't help but feel very grateful for that, because that was why Phoenix had prepared that whole show with fireworks in the shape of little animals. And Lily was very excited. The two joked about having a little animal that looked a lot like Lily and laughed about how she managed to get so high. But the little creature spoke seriously, stating that in the future she would also be able to fly. Seeing her daughter so energetic in that way gave a certain relief to the protagonist. and it also made her think that perhaps the problem wasn't very serious after all. Surprisingly, the next firework that exploded spelled out the name Martina. Down in the palace square was Phoenix controlling everything with enviable mastery. However, he paused to think for a moment. He began to consider that perhaps he was doing too much, but he didn't let himself be swayed by that thought. After all, he was the new vassal of Her Majesty. Moreover, to ensure that everything would happen in the best possible way, it was better to be on Martina's good side. However, when he entered the room, he was greatly surprised. He didn't know that the child in question was that thing, but for the princess, that was something natural. She even introduced her as her daughter, and the sacred beast opened its arms to introduce itself as well, very happy with the wizard's presence there. She got even more excited, asking if it was really Phoenix who did all that with the fireworks outside, something he confirmed. But he couldn't disconnect from the fact that the sacred beast really existed and wasn't just a folklore of the nobility. And while petting Lily, he realized that she was quite cuddly like a stuffed animal. Martina laid her down in her crib and explained that she was made of condensed magic. And that was exactly why she asked the wizard for help to treat her, explaining that the little creature was complaining of a stomachache. The boy didn't understand. He was just an ordinary student from the Tower of Wizards, so he asked if the princess really wanted to trust him to resolve such an important matter. To which she replied that she believed that in the future he would surpass all the other sorcerers and become the best of them. Phoenix looks at her a bit uncertain still. Perhaps he didn't know how that princess found him, let alone why she believed so much in his potential. His lips tightened in tension in such an unusual situation. After all, the girl in front of him was the first person besides himself who believed in his potential. So he resolved to use his powers even though he was unsure of what he could or couldn't do. As he chanted that magic, he felt very uncomfortable. But finally, the boy had found the exact spot of the pain. The magic he was experiencing was very different from any other he had encountered, especially the human one. It was mysterious and immense. It made him think that this was the sacred beast carrying the fate of that empire. When he finally says something, it's to comment to Martina that the creature's body was very different from any existing human or animal. This was because it overflowed with pure magic. The creature even shone with how intense this magnetic energy was. But he explains that the problem in Lily's stomach came from a strange magic that had not been digested by her, and it ended up influencing the rest of her energy. This leaves Martina a bit worried. She suspects that this magic probably came from the second kiss of loyalty that Ryan gave to the princess. He remembered very well the face he had, and the little window informing that the energy transferred by kisses would decrease by 50%. When he asked if there was a way to solve this, Phoenix responded cheerfully, explaining that since she couldn't digest it, obviously she would need to do some exercise. He questions whether Lily happened to spend the whole day in someone's lap without walking on her own, and the princess was a bit reluctant to answer that she had spoiled that creature quite a bit. Miel interrupts the two, explaining that this only happened because it was dangerous for the creature to live in the palace, so she needed protection all the time. The mage quickly glares at him with a mocking expression, but Martina steps in front of the two, saying that she didn't need anyone to defend her, and she admits that she had indeed spoiled the girl a lot, but wanted to focus on the solution. So she asked what would be best for her, suggesting a daily walk. But Phoenix replies that this time he could help solve the problem. And using all his skills, he was focused on trying to trace the pattern of magic within the creature, because as long as he could do that, there was no problem he couldn't solve. The boy smiles confidently while using his knowledge, feeling that he was impressing the princess and nailing it. Meanwhile, Miel tried to shield Martina's eyes from that light that was almost blinding them. It didn't take long for the entire room to light up, and when the two noticed, the little one was already feeling a bit better. She moves slowly, also opening her wings and stretching out to make sure everything was okay, before jumping onto her mother and celebrating that she was finally not feeling any pain. The princess makes it clear that from that day on, things would change because Lily would have to go out to walk on her own, and she would only be held if she followed those instructions. The sacred beast also thanks Phoenix very much, calling him brother, and he takes this opportunity to ask how he should address Martina then, because if he were to consider just their ages, it would be more appropriate to call her sister. This makes the princess give an ironic smile. She knew she had a great effect on the men she encountered. Meanwhile, poor Lilin and Miel had to keep staring at that whole scene, and the servant was not liking it at all, something that the knight noticed right away, but she decided not to comment on anything. So she approached the protagonist to warn her that it was getting late, and argues that the maid shouldn't leave so late. Therefore, she would take him to the mage's tower without any problem. Thus, the group makes their way to the palace exit, and Martina takes the opportunity to offer a reward to Phoenix. After all, he had healed her daughter, who was so precious. So, still a bit awkward, he asks if he could call her sister when they were alone. This makes the girl hesitate in her steps, before turning to him, who looks at her seriously. Noticing the girl's approach, Phoenix becomes even more nervous, but she doesn't mind. In fact, she seems to be enjoying it, and she states that he was a very easy person to read. And then she makes it clear that if his research with magic needed more funding, he should show her more results and set aside his little games. The two stand there, too close to each other in silence, until the princess turned her back, asking him to go home and rest soon, calling him little brother. That woman definitely had a way of enchanting men, leaving Phoenix completely dumbfounded. He was embarrassed because it was as if the princess could see everything about him, even without saying a word. When she saw that the young man was falling behind, Lilin asked him to hurry up, and so he did. Excited, he began to ask if perhaps the knight could tell him what Martina liked, and the girl explained that she couldn't share information about Her Majesty's private life. So the wizard asked if she could give him some tips on how he could become Martina's personal guard, and the woman smiled, saying that she could even do that. She explained that in the past, there were 3 other men besides her who took care of the princess, but since they were only trying to seduce her, thinking they would manage to become her lovers or something like that, they ended up saying disgusting things about Martina behind her back. And this reached an unbearable point for Lily, who ended up fighting with them. Of course, it wasn't easy after all. It was a fight of 1 against 3. But when she was getting close to her limit, someone threw a sword in her direction, something that definitely took her by surprise. It had been Martina who threw that sword, and she didn't understand why, at least until she heard the princess telling her to give those idiots a good beating in her favor, stating that if she did that, she would become her only personal guard. Sometime later, the princess was already used to taking her sacred crossbow for walks in the palace gardens, and the nobles, the maids, and even the guards did not stop observing the little creature having fun with great passion. This was because they all adored Lily, and even the way they looked at the princess had changed. Now Martina conversed with these people calmly, always bringing Lily in her lap. That's why she thought it might be time to introduce her to high society, letting all the nobles know that Lily was her most precious daughter. Moreover, she could use this opportunity to find out how many nobles were leaning towards her brother's side. Mayfield was the only thing that still worried her, because she had to know how many of those high society snobs would have the courage to stand by her side to take over the empire. Although the nobles seemed very disunited, they all had their own factions and personal interests. Of course, due to her past, few people could stand Martina, and only the nobles with a terrible reputation were willing to take her side. And that was precisely why she ordered 3 types of invitations to be prepared. A letter for all the nobles, where she could probe those villains who were in her favor, and some people who were on the fence and might have changed their minds recently. The second was for all those who had already rejected her. It was like a threat, in a way she used to do before. And among those people were some nobles who belonged to her brother. And because of Mayfield's support, they had the courage to despise the girl. But there was a third group that was not afraid of threats. They received a letter with a kind of blackmail, saying that she would reward people double, regardless of the price they wanted. Of course, they were not the best guests, but they would certainly make great spies in the future. As for those who continued to reject her despite all this, they were either very loyal to Mayfield or definitely not worth it. They were like pieces on a chessboard, very important golden pieces. But besides these nobles, there was still someone on the princess's mind, the person who was delivering her letters to thousands of noble houses every day after receiving their responses. This young man also had to organize all the information about the houses, and even someone made of iron wouldn't be able to endure this work for long. The girl quickly entered the room, finding Miel clearly tired of having to do all this. He was shocked by the fact that the girl had gone to the palace servants' squad, but she arrived complaining, saying that she had told him to rest that day, and asked why Miel was working if he was burning with fever. To which he replied that he thought if he organized those letters faster, it would help. But Martina said he didn't need to do that, and it was better for him to go back to bed soon. Pulling the young man quickly, even though he didn't move from his spot, he laughed, saying that since he was much bigger than the princess, she could end up hurting herself doing that, which made Martina even more stressed, and she threatened to delay his payment if he kept laughing. So he gave in, getting up willingly from his bed. Still, he was worried about being able to transmit his illness to the princess, arguing that she shouldn't be there at all. Then Martina carefully places her hand under Miel's forehead and states that he seemed to be better than in the morning. Even so, he needed to rest. The boy nervously takes the girl's hand, pulling her away from there, and arguing that she shouldn't treat a mere servant that way. The two were too close to each other. But Martina didn't care. In fact, she wanted to know why Miel wanted her to follow the etiquette of princesses so much. After all, everyone already called her the evil princess, so doing that wouldn't change her reputation. Only the boy said that wasn't what he meant. What he was saying was that she was too good to a servant, and that would end up causing a misunderstanding with other people. Finally, the princess understood what he meant. However, she didn't care about that. According to her, her servants were hers, so she could treat them however she wanted. Still, Miel tried to convince her that despite being a very kind person, she didn't need to do that. But he ended up stopping in the middle of the pretense. He was feeling very stirred up by the girl's presence there, and trying to hold himself back by gripping his own hands, he gently asked her to leave his room. Because a princess shouldn't be wasting her precious time with a mere servant. Martina turned with sad eyes to the boy whom she secretly considered a friend, and she walked slowly to the door, trying to avoid looking back. She couldn't believe she had been rejected even by the servant. Far away from there, at the chief judge's residence, the princess's carriage arrived, and she was quickly welcomed by the household servants to be guided to her master. The girl followed the maid through the corridors while Lily, who was in her lap, asked who they were going to meet. To which the princess replied that it was the most important judge of that nation. But the child had no idea what a judge was, so the girl simplified it, saying that if someone did something bad, it was the judge who decided what would happen to that person. But that didn't exactly give a very clear view of what this guy did. And the little creature even commented that it seemed quite scary. And for that reason, she would behave even better than usual. But Martina explained that she didn't need to do that. She could just be herself, because that old man wasn't a cruel person after all. Matthew Douglas, the chief judge, had been born to judge good and evil, and in his heart, the thin line that separated these two spheres was more important than anything else. In his past life, it was his hammer, the one responsible for sentencing the princess to a lifetime of exile. And now, there he was at the top of his palace like a true king. He was the first to return Martina's 3 invitations in that life. But now there it was, a tea with cookies on the table ready for her. He bowed to her, saying it was an honor to serve the princess, who also greeted him respectfully. Lily made a point of saying hello, although she was a bit shy and scared. And Matthew commented that he thought the sacred beast shouldn't leave the palace, because she needed to always be in a protected place and surrounded by people of royal blood. But Martina asked him not to worry, because she had brought many guards with her. Then she told Matthew to sit down. He sighed, knowing there was no way to go against all that stubbornness. Without further ado, the girl explained that she had come there to personally ask why he decided to decline the invitation to the creature's full moon party. To which he replied that he had explained in the letter he sent that he hadn't been feeling very well lately, and he didn't want to ruin the girl's party with a sickly appearance. But she counters by asking what he would say if he knew he was the only person she wanted to invite, because she wanted him to bless her so that she would have a soul as just as the judges. Even so, the guy says there were other people who deserved this honor more. Martina was in a tight spot, thinking about how she would argue with that old man who lived to argue with others. The girl clenches her fists, trying to contain her anger, and she explains that the fireplace in her room was very hot, so she was going to get some fresh air. But she asks him to keep her daughter company in the meantime because she was too fragile to accompany. The young man even tries to argue that this wasn't a good idea, but he is soon provoked by Martina, who questions whether he would really oppose doing something so trivial in Prudel. So with no more excuses to give, he has no choice but to give in to Martina's wishes. When she reached the porch, she made a point of stretching. That tense atmosphere was doing her no good, but she also knew that this whole fight was pure acting for her to get what she wanted. In fact, she had arranged everything perfectly with Lily about what to do. The creature felt like a movie star. It was definitely better for the princess to tone down the fantasy books than little Lily. In her past life, due to Mayfield's schemes, she was sentenced to death, as we already know. But the supreme judge persuaded the other nobles until that sentence was reduced to mere exile. She remembered Mayfield arguing that she had been imprisoned and yet continued with the sacred beast's passage rituals, which proved she had no intention of harming her. But Martina was curious because he had always hated her arrogant little ways. So why defend her right at the end? While passing through a small village during her exile, she ended up encountering a rather unusual situation. It was a woman shouting for someone to hurry back for dinner because if they didn't hurry, Uncle Mayfield would get very angry. And the children she was talking to laughed, saying that would never happen because the man adored them more than anything. That's when Martina discovered that the judge had built several orphanages in poorer villages to care for those children who had no home to return to. And even though he was a very serious noble, he loved children very much. That's why he had put Lily to help, making it clear that she could act as she always did. The sacred beast asks her uncle why he didn't like her, but he explains that this wasn't the case and asks why she thought that, to which the little creature responds that he was very serious with her, but he explains that was just what she thought, a royal etiquette. Then the little girl provokes him by saying that this was indeed the case and that he should pet her head because everyone who liked her did that. The judge was really surprised by the fact that the sacred beast, the princess, was so direct and loving, and he was starting to think that the rumors about his bond with the creature being so strong were true. So he carefully approached to fulfill the creature's request, placing his hand on her head with great affection so as not to hurt her. When he finally petted her head, Lily went wild. She was very happy, and she asked him not to hold back because her mother had already said that her head was the best for a pet. Matthew was smiling, very different from when the two arrived at the castle, and he even admitted that Martina was right. Speaking of her, the girl who was still on the porch watched the scene with satisfaction. After all, she had managed to reach her goal. She knew it was impossible for such a stubborn judge to be on her side, but just him recognizing the existence and legitimacy of Lily would already be a great help later. As time passed, the girl decided to leave, but made it clear that she would not give up and hoped that she and the judge could have a better conversation in the future. She asks the little creature to say goodbye to the gentleman, which she does in a very cute way, calling him bearded uncle or inviting him to play with her next time. A little more affectionate than earlier, he says goodbye to Lily and wishes Martina that the bond between the two always continues this way. And then he watches the carriage leave. It was then that one of his maids noticed that he was covered in that child's fur and asked him to change so she could clean the clothes. And surprisingly, the guy asked her to gather all that fur and make a little ball. The maid couldn't help but comment that he really liked that little child. Far away in the royal palace, Martina was already back, with her usual frown and accompanied by Lily. But she was greeted by one of her mother's maids who explained that her two parents were inviting her to dinner. Before accepting, the girl asked if it would just be her or if Mayfield had also been invited. To which the maid replied that Her Majesty had informed that it would be a rare and cozy family dinner. Martina's eyes were mysterious as she pondered what she should do. Then she asked Lily to take the sacred beast to her room and place it on the bed in case she took too long at dinner. She needed to see what this was all about. After all, even before she could finish organizing the full moon party for Lily, they had invented this family dinner. As she followed the maid through the corridors, she wondered if the reason for the meeting was her refusal to form an alliance with another empire. Or perhaps Mayfield had tried to do something else. Even so, she was sure it wouldn't be anything good. This was because, as it was the largest royal family in the empire, that house felt like a suffocating prison. Her father, Gardner Morand, was a cold-hearted politician who married the daughter of another noble, and before their marriage, they hadn't even met. Her mother, Isabel Milan, was a gentle and fragile noble girl at that time. She carried many romantic fantasies into her marriage, but all she received from her husband was indifference. She even thought that if she became the perfect empress, she would receive love in return. Therefore, she dedicated her entire life to learning etiquette and walking on eggshells to manage things. And she made sure to raise Martina and her brother with the same restrictions. Curiously, those times when both were subjected to the same reality as their mother were the times when Mayfield and she were closest. She remembered a day when the boy was staring at her during one of her lessons. Noticing her sister's affection as she read a book, the little boy turned to their mother, noticing that Martina seemed very tired, and asked if he could take her for a walk inside their library, something that Isabel allowed, making it clear that they had to return soon because he needed to finish reading the entire history book of the Imperial Wars that same day. And so they went, in that immense palace, and in that library surrounded by books that they couldn't even count. Mayfield held his sister's hand while the little girl tried not to fall asleep. She asked if he had made up that excuse just to avoid studying, as he was certainly not keeping her company out of kindness. But he scolded her, saying that she needed to speak more quietly. And since she had figured out his whole plan, he could play a little with her, suggesting that they play hide-and-seek in the library, something that the little girl accepted without a second thought, because it was much more exciting than reading any book that was inside. Hide-and-seek was a game that the two siblings loved to play frequently, and he came up with this idea because Isabel insisted on keeping them locked in the library all day. So the little boy opened one of the books, saying that today it was his turn to hide. So he would use that book. Basically, the person responsible for hiding would choose a book and place a piece of paper inside it, and then they could hide it on any shelf in the library. They would ask a question, and the answer would be on the note. So Mayfield asked if Martina wanted to know something, and the little girl became thoughtful, before questioning why he was her brother, but this question did not make him happy at all. And he explained that it was because their mother had given birth to him first, and logically, that made him Martina's brother. But that wasn't what the princess meant. And finally, she explained that in the stories she read, siblings were always kind to each other, so she wanted to know why he always bothered her. In fact, what really left her in doubt was why Mayfield was such a mean person. The innocent little girl asked her brother if he thought she was born unlucky, and he retorted that with such a spoiled sister, it was he who was unlucky. Frustrated, she stomped her foot, saying she would go back to studying and that he could play alone. But the boy tried to stop her, saying that if she got stressed because of him, their mother would scold him, something that Martina didn't care about. Then, in a desperate attempt to contain the princess, he said he would give her a serious answer in the note he was writing. Moreover, if he won the game, he could buy any dress the girl wanted. He was going to hide a copy called Blood and Power. Thus, the protagonist set off in search of the book. She knew that if the cause of the two ended before she found it, Mayfield would win. That's why she always worked very hard. But that day, she didn't seem to be very lucky. However, she didn't really care since she already had several beautiful dresses in her wardrobe. And she was only playing that game because she wanted to defeat Mayfield. It was then that a book slightly protruding from the shelf caught her attention. It was definitely the one the princess was looking for. However, she couldn't reach it without help. It didn't take long for her brother to approach, offering that help to hurt her pride. And it worked since the little girl turned around, stressed, denying the help and accusing him of having placed the book up high on purpose. Continuing the provocation, Mayfield reached out to grab the book, and he made it clear to Martina that if she begged, he could help. And in this way, he would still count it as a victory for her. The princess couldn't believe what her brother was doing. He was the person she hated the most at that moment. Hearing those harsh words from his sister, the little boy suggested that she could admit her defeat. And since he was her brother, he wouldn't punish her for it. That day, the game of hide-and-seek ended without any result, because the girl didn't admit her defeat nor begged Mayfield. Instead, she punched the boy and caused a scene in front of their mother. But since they had broken the rules and the boy had disturbed his own sister, both ended up being punished by having to copy several books by hand. To this day, she didn't know what that note inside the book said, because she never managed to reach it. When she finally entered the dining room, the atmosphere was horrible. Her brother quickly glanced at her with the same look of disgust as always, while Martina focused on avoiding any eye contact as she sat at the table. Her father was the first to speak, saying he had heard from some ministers that she was getting closer to them, which was good news after all. This was a great quality for a princess to have. But all she replied was that she was now the mother of one of the sacred beasts guarding the kingdom, so she needed to show the qualities of a true heir just as her father had told her to do. And the man smiled, agreeing and confirming that he always imagined Martina would become a daughter he could be proud of. The girl was fully aware that her father's values outweighed the desires of the other nobles. So, as long as he believed she could be a great empress, she wouldn't condemn him without the slightest mercy as he did in her past life, because in that life, things were very different for the princess. So, when Mayfield accused her of having killed one of the sacred beasts, there was no one by her side to defend her. And since her father was faced with a princess who was hated by the nobles and the ministers, he ordered the judge to impose the harshest sentence on her. In her family, all relationships were built on their utility and many calculations. While her mother was there to charm the nobles of the southeast, she and Mayfield smiled by her side as representations of the crown's mercy and stood still like true toys. And just like toys, her father would pick them up from time to time when they were needed, discarding both as soon as he completed his plans. That's how Martina and Mayfield ended up this way. The king drummed his fingers on the thoughtful table, and then he told the protagonist that next week the second prince of Heathning would come to propose marriage. He knew that Isabel had already told her about it, so he wanted to know why the girl hadn't prepared. He had even heard rumors about her being busy with the full moon banquet of the sacred beast. Now it made sense for him to have invited the girl to that pleasant meal, but she wasn't afraid and calmly explained that she had already spoken to her mother, who would not accept the proposal as she had no intention of marrying. Mayfield couldn't help but smirk at this situation, and he added fuel to the fire by saying that for almost a century, the kingdom and the Heathning Empire had not gotten along. Therefore, this arranged marriage was a great opportunity to change that relationship. With an ironic smile, he asked his dear sister if she really wanted to throw away this precious opportunity. But Martina didn't back down to Mayfield and returned the question, saying that if he was so excited about it, he could marry the prince without any problems. Until their father intervened, explaining that the Heathning Empire only had 4 princes. And he explains to Martina that he thought she might be worried that there would be no one to take care of the sacred beast if she got married, but he had already resolved that. And he rings a bell, summoning Louise to bring those people, who enters a room timidly, causing Martina to stand up with great tension. Isabel enters the room with 2 children holding her hands, and she explains that they were her sacred beasts, and that the kingdom had discovered a magic that allowed them to take on human form, for the first time in the history of the empire. Therefore, they did not need to worry about the creatures, because she herself would take care of both and would do everything to ensure they lived well. Again, the woman insisted that her daughter accept the marriage. The girl understood everything that was happening, They wanted to use Lily to force her to marry someone she didn't even want to. She was tense. She didn't know what kind of magic had been used on the girl, and she really wanted to know why she had transformed into that. A small window appears informing that the bonds between the sacred beast and its guardian had been damaged. The lady caresses the children's hands, showing her daughter how well-mannered the two were, and she would take very good care of them. So Martina and Mayfield should just listen to what the king had to say and serve the nation. The woman still assures that she would treat these creatures as her own granddaughters. It was then that she realized she still didn't know the name of her brother's sacred beast, introducing him as Siegfried, a very heroic name for that lady. This whole situation was very strange for Martina because those two children did not react to anything, as if they were being controlled, so she knew there was something wrong with that magic. Turning to her brother, she wondered if he even knew about this, but the boy's eyes were dark, and the protagonist did not know the reason for his serious expression at that moment. Apparently, her father and mother had not said anything about it, but if that were really the case, Martina could use it to her advantage. She sits down again, saying that since her mother would take care of the two children, she could rest. However, she argues that a sacred beast becoming a human was something historic in the kingdom, so it might be good to announce this miracle to the public. This time, she is the one who taps the table, sending a discreet signal to Mayfield. She knew that the thing that united everyone in the kingdom was the opinion that sacred beasts should be protected, so she needed to expose that. Because only by revealing it to the nobles and citizens could she ensure that no one would harm these creatures. Martina knew she couldn't trust anyone in that family, not even her father. She had already sent a signal to Mayfield, and if he was as smart as she thought he would understand. Speaking of the boy, he soon opened an ironic smile, agreeing with his sister that it would be great to announce that the two sacred beasts had turned into humans on the same day. Arguing with their mother that if they didn't do this, his treacherous little sister would tell people that she managed to achieve this feat before him. The king gave the final word, saying it was a good idea and that he would consider it, surprising both Martina and her brother. However, he made it clear that this would only happen after they did everything they were supposed to do. And Bravo states that they were part of the royalty of the Morand Empire, so their life, dignity, and even their destiny could only be used for the benefit of this empire. Therefore, if they really wanted to have the right to succession, they needed to offer every last drop of their blood for the empire. In this very pleasant atmosphere, dinner was coming to an end, and everyone was heading to their quarters. Lily was still holding the hand of her supposed grandmother when Martina called her name, but there was no reaction from the girl. In a supposition, Mayfield comments that they must have used forbidden magic. After all, they knew that their father was capable of anything. In his mind, these sacred beasts were just another tool for him to seize all the power. The protagonist turns to her brother with a look that could kill anyone who looked at her, and then she calls him for a serious conversation. The two head to the most private place possible, on one of the castle's balconies, and the woman breaks the silence, commenting how the scene from earlier reminded her of when they were still children, which the boy confesses is a surprise, because he couldn't even believe that the protagonist missed him. Sensing the direction of that conversation, the girl makes it clear that if he didn't want to talk, he didn't need to have responded to the signal he gave at the table earlier. Then, losing a bit of his tough guy pose, Mayfield confirms that he knew what she was talking about when their father swapped them when they were still children, and she can't help but point out that they were roughly the age of the sacred beasts in their human form. But of course, the prince can't hold back and comments that actually she was a bit smaller. Ignoring that, she recalls that several noble families in the past joined in a rebellion, catching the empire off guard, and despite him negotiating with those nobles in front of others, he was already preparing a way to take out and end the lives of his enemies. Moreover, their father even had the audacity to swap them as hostages to ensure that his enemies would lower their guard a bit. And Mayfield remembers that after that, they spent a year locked in a stable with a terrible smell. He also remembered one of those arrogant nobles who thought they had already won the battle, and ignored any threat trying to take the girl. It was almost pathetic. All it took was for Mayfield to cut him with a piece of horseshoe. After that, he started screaming and ran away from there. The girl smiled, asking if, by any chance, he didn't remember the embarrassing moments he himself went through. And she made a point of commenting on how he ended up getting malaria and spent days with a fever, while Martino had to beg to get some medicine for the prince. When all this happened, they barely spoke to each other because talking too much made them even hungrier. They were like a pair of stray dogs that no one wanted. Still, they were united. The two toast amidst laughter, recalling that when their father finally won, he thought the siblings were already dead. But to his misfortune, they were very much alive. The young man rests his wine glass on the counter, before asking if the girl didn't want the sacred beasts to be used as hostages and therefore wanted help to recover them. He understood perfectly, even without her explaining. But Mayfield would like to know what he would gain in return for this help, and Martina thought for a moment, seriously, before responding. Opening her heart for the first time in years, she explains that he was her only brother and the only person she could minimally count on. But the young man quickly pulls her face so she looks at him, saying that she was a great actress. Changing her posture, Martina gets straight to the point, asking what he wanted, but makes it clear that she wouldn't give up the line of association. Then Mayfield thinks of another thing he wanted. He wanted a territory in Kayland that was in the girl's hands, something she had no problem handing over, as long as he committed to recovering the sacred beasts while she was there resolving the marriage issue. Thus, they seal an agreement with the guarantee that Mayfield would do the possible and the impossible. But before she leaves the balcony, she congratulates the protagonist for becoming family again, calling her dear sister, inside the castle. The girl walked, thinking about the conversation. She knew she couldn't trust her brother 100%, but that agreement would be enough for him not to turn against her while her father forced her into this marriage. However, she had no idea what to do about this last part. However, her thoughts were interrupted when she entered her room and found a terrible scene. Miel was completely injured, being bandaged with the help of Lilin and Louise. So she immediately asked what had happened. Then, Louise approached and explained that Martina had asked her to take the sacred beast directly to her room, but shortly after that, the queen arrived saying that she was the one who should take the beast. And with her were 12 guards, so the three couldn't stop the woman. Miel ended up injured, precisely trying to recover the sacred beast. And the servant apologizes because due to his fault, he couldn't protect Lily. The princess looks deeply at him, thinking about what to say to that young man. But before she speaks, she asks her maids to wait outside, something both quickly agree to. Then she approaches Miel and asks if he was hurt, asking to see up close. The girl tries to touch him carefully, and even so, the butler remains apprehensive, arguing with her the same thing as always, that she was a noble princess and shouldn't be looking at a male body so closely. But she simply replies that it was okay because she had seen other men before this. And this statement manages to floor Miel, who should be more worried about his own health than about jealousy. Even so, he maintains his speech, saying that he didn't deserve this care because he was just a servant. And he changes the subject by asking if the girl happened to know where Lily was. After all, he was also quite worried, as it seemed there was some resentment among the people brought by the queen. Without much fanfare, Martina explains that her mother had used some kind of magic to turn the creature into a human being, but Lily didn't seem well at all. Basically, they were using her as a way to blackmail Martina into a political marriage. She explains that they also took her brother's sacred beast, so she ended up with few options, besides joining him for now. This indeed surprises Miel, and he asks, indignantly, if the girl had really asked Mayfield for help. His eyes fill with rage for a moment, and he questions the protagonist if she had needed to ask someone like the prince for help, just because he himself couldn't do anything right. And all this self-deprecation makes the girl even more stressed about the situation, asking what the hell he was saying. Then Miel continues in his spiral of suffering, explaining that because he couldn't stop the queen and even less protect Lily, the monarchs found a weakness to exploit, and now Martina had to ask for help from the person she hated the most in the world. The boy was truly losing his mind, shouting that he didn't even know what he was doing in that castle after all. The mercenary could take care of the guards, and the new mage could heal Lily, but Miel was completely useless as a servant. It was then that the protagonist decided to put an end to that whole show by slapping the servant in the face and telling him that she didn't want to hear another peep. She argues that he had dedicated his entire life and everything in his life to her, so she didn't need more proof of his usefulness. Miel was completely disoriented, not sure if it was from the slap, the words, or both. Still, he finds the strength to say that he would like to be more useful to the princess, as he hated seeing her sad without being able to do anything about it. But he quickly apologizes, as he knew the girl must be very sad about all the current events, and then asks to leave, telling her to rest a bit. Martina just watches him leave without saying anything. The girl was downcast about the whole situation, and alone, she repeats that Miel was someone very useful to her, sunk in tremendous loneliness. This was because the girl felt he had been very useful since they were children. He made that vow. She remembered when she was sad, and the boy would just stare at her. One time, he asked if the prince had provoked her again, and she hit him with a pillow, having to listen to shouts about how she didn't even want to hear her brother's name. The boy laughed, asking her to calm down a bit, and suggesting that he could tell a story to cheer her up, and so he did. The boy knew so many different stories and always stayed by the princess's side. That day, she fell asleep, resting on his chest, right in the middle of the story. But now, Martina couldn't help but wonder why Miel had turned into someone unrecognizable. Meanwhile, in the queen's chambers, the woman watched the two sacred beasts, now human, sleeping in her bed. They were in a deep sleep, as if nothing was going on in their heads. When her husband entered the room, Isabel informed him that both were resting and even offered to show them. But the king was clearly not interested. Still, the woman tried to argue that an opportunity like that was unique. And besides, their children were always fighting, so it was rare to see them so well behaved. This last part is what catches the gentleman's attention the most. And he provokes his wife, blaming her for raising those two in a very ill-mannered way. And he even questions the queen if she didn't feel ashamed of that. For the first time, Isabel reacts to his provocations, defending herself and saying that she hadn't done any of that. And if they grew up like that, it certainly wasn't on purpose. Gardner turns his back, informing her that the most important thing at that moment were the sacred beasts, and she should focus on taking care of them in the best way possible to avoid bringing even more shame to her family. A few days later, the Prince of Heathning finally came to visit the Miranda Empire, arriving with a great abundance in his caravan covered with gifts. He slowly gets down from the carriage. His name was Nosa Heathning, the second oldest brother of Ryan. While Martina observed his arrival, she noticed how different the two were, besides the fact that Ryan would never dress like a walking Christmas tree. And speaking of him, she wondered where he was. Had delivered an invitation that time, but even so, the boy didn't even bother to see it. On the afternoon Nosa arrived, his father insisted on throwing a welcome banquet, and the boy invited her to meet alone later. But she couldn't help but find it very strange that he didn't want to make the marriage proposal in front of others. That whole situation gave many advantages to the princess, because if the boy truly wanted to build a relationship with her, it meant that the marriage might not be a closed deal. So she put her best smile on her face to accept the invitation to meet privately. Receiving a shower of compliments from the boy who said that the rumors about her being a bad person must be based on pure envy. Her brother Mayfield watched everything closely with an ironic smile. Even so, Martina maintained her composure, confirming that it was probably just bad people trying to tarnish her image. Thus, with the fall of night, it was time for them to meet. The boy thanked her, explaining that he had rented a mansion in the countryside to enjoy his stay, and he hoped she would visit him, something Martina said she would do if the opportunity arose. Then Nosa placed a kiss on the princess's hand, saying that just thinking about seeing her again filled his heart with joy. However, the little window soon revealed that besides not being a pillar of the nation, the boy also had no sense of loyalty towards the princess, who smiled ironically, for she knew that despite being a prince, Nosa was nothing but a complete fool. The next day, the girl was bombarded by Louise, showing options for dresses that would be perfect for a date with the prince. According to her, they were new designs from the kingdom's official tailor, and she wanted to know her opinion, but she didn't like either of them and asked for a simpler option. The maid tried to argue that since she and Nosa would have a date that day, she needed to wear something nice. But that didn't matter to the princess, who repeated her orders, explaining that she didn't even like that boy. If she were honest, if her father wasn't keeping Lily captive, she wouldn't have accepted that invitation to begin with. She had gone to visit her daughter earlier in the room where she was, but her mother blocked her at the door and only let her look from there. The little girl still hadn't woken up, and the system created by the prophet couldn't connect with her. So all she could do for now was yield and accept that invitation. Maybe it would be good for her to find some weakness in that idiot. She was stressed because she couldn't talk about it with the maids. Besides, she had gotten used to discussing any topic of her life with Miel, but since they had fought, the boy had started to come even less to her room, and he usually sent other servants to do his tasks. She couldn't help but complain about him for stressing her out so much at that moment, giving a kick to her vanity table in the middle of this fit of rage. A maid enters the room startled by the noise, asking if everything was okay and saying she could fetch some medicine, but the princess screams that she didn't want any medicine, and instead, she preferred to suspend Miel's salary for a month. But Louise comments that he hadn't done anything, and the girl screams, saying that it was exactly because he hadn't done anything that she was taking such a drastic measure. Sometime later, on the streets of the imperial city, Martina was meeting her suitor, who helped her down from the carriage. She looked beautiful and indeed ended up choosing a simpler and more serious dress that suited her very well. The two arrived at the meeting point, and the protagonist was surprised. He had taken her to an auction house full of items hidden inside. Hearing Rosa's musings, she asked if he also liked to visit such palaces in his own kingdom, something he confirmed, because he had grown tired of the more public forms of entertainment. So, he preferred to enjoy pleasures that would surely send people to hell afterward. He was probably one of those sadists. But that didn't impress Martina, who looked at him with indifference. After all, she didn't even want to be there. While adjusting herself, he explained that most nobles wore those masks, while the commoners tried their luck and showed their faces, perhaps to be noticed by other nobles. While he helped her put on her mask, the protagonist commented that he seemed to know a lot about that place, and that's why she was sure the day would be great. Whispering in her ear, Nosa affirmed that with him, for sure, the princess would experience endless pleasure. Trying to provoke the boy, Martina confesses that she had heard that the king did not approve of nobles engaging in such activities, and she asks if the prince was not concerned about the consequences of that. This seems to leave Nosa somewhat tense while he helped the girl, but he asks her not to worry about it, as he would protect her from anything. Besides, his father was getting old, so he probably wouldn't last much longer. Their conversation was interrupted by a scream from Martina. The boy had tied the mask to one of his hair uncles, bothering her quite a bit. She can't help but jab at him, saying that she hated clumsy people. And Nosa apologizes, justifying that he was very eager to get closer to her. He offered to pay for anything the girl wanted that day in compensation, but she doesn't respond. She just says she needs to go to the bathroom and tells the boy not to bother her. Handing a card to the protagonist, Nosa explains that he would be waiting for her in box number 1, so she could take the card, and a servant would show her the way. Inside, the nobles were seated and settled. Observing the whole scene, Martina finally understood that her future suitor only wanted to use her reputation because he was an unpopular prince from where he came, but he was not one of the pillars of the nation, just as the window had revealed to her a few days ago. So marrying him could even ease some tension between their nations and expand her father's power. But being married to an incompetent husband would only make her a completely disposable pawn. While scanning the people present, she ended up recognizing someone. It was Phoenix with a serious face, and the girl had no idea what he was doing there. But this was a great opportunity for her. She dismisses the deer that was guiding her and explains that he could go because she already knew the way. The presenter announces a magical crystal coming from the enchanted forest as the next item in the auction. It was a gem that was born from the corpses of magical beasts, and the bids were to start at 3,000 coins, something Phoenix quickly accepted. The bids continued competitively among the people there. In the midst of all this confusion, Martina ended up sitting next to her sponsored boy, who seemed not to have recognized her. Observing those movements, the woman suggests that it might be better to start the bids now because he would need to observe his opponent's strategy. But the boy responds quite rudely, asking who she was and telling her to mind her own business. He couldn't help but comment on how it was a coincidence to find so many red-haired nobles in recent days. It was interesting to see how the boy acted with strangers. Even so, she laughs and explains that she had heard that commoners who went without masks were trying to get noticed by the nobles. So she thought the boy was hoping for that, but he had no idea about that, as the person who told him about the existence of that place never mentioned that detail. And Martina responds by commenting that he was quite handsome, so she was sure many nobles would be interested in him, which gives him a great idea. He completely changes his approach, trying to appear as a servant, and asks if that lady was interested in him too, making it clear that he was a noble and very expensive. The girl needs to cover her face with a fan to hide that she was about to burst out laughing, and she asks how expensive exactly, because she was an only daughter of a viscount, so she didn't have that much money. His expression changes quickly and he steps away from the woman, telling her not to bother him if that was the case, suggesting that if she liked that kind of sponsorship game, it would be better to find someone cheaper than him. The woman asks how he could have the courage to say that to the daughter of a viscount, and he responds by asking if all nobles were like her, trying to humiliate others without even thinking, to which she retorts wanting to know how intelligent the boy was. And Phoenix explains that only super intelligent people could learn magic. In the midst of this, the auction boy was already at 3,900 gold coins to win the prize, which increased to 4,100 gold coins, which quickly became 4,200, reaching the maximum price that Phoenix expected, as that was all he had with his savings. It was then that the man asked if he could raise the bid by 100 gold coins, or if 200 would be even better. Then Martina raised the boy's hand, stating that he would bid 4,500 gold coins. He yells at the woman, asking who told her to do that and questioning her mental sanity. After all, she didn't even know him, theoretically. And that's it for today. Martina continues standing strong, a true lioness mother, protecting Lily like the whole world is against them. And honestly, after everything she went through in her past life, it makes perfect sense that she's this determined. The scene of Lily's birth was truly beautiful. You can really feel Martina's relief, like she had been waiting for that moment for years. And then we have Ryan. Officially, he showed up as an ally. But let's be honest, the way he lifted her onto that horse like he just walked out of a historical romance novel, that has potential. For now, sure. It's just alliance and loyalty, but the way they look at each other says a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if this turns into romance later. And if it does, it's going to cause trouble for a lot of people. Meanwhile, Mayfield continues being the kind of man we're all grateful isn't part of our family. He simply does not give up on ruining everyone's life. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Martina and Ryan make a good match? Should she even open space for romance right now? Or is it too soon? And what do you imagine for Lily's future? Share your thoughts in the comments. I love reading your theories. The story is called She Will Tame the Heroes, and I've covered up to chapter 23. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. Kisses, and see you next time.